Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto changes after Orochimaru placed seal on Sasuke incident and becomes serious. Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. The blonde he held wiggled furiously within his grasp and the snake Sanin turned towards him with an interested gleam in his eyes. Those features were so similar, it made him nauseous. He shivered unpleasantly and a wicked smile of delight spread over his face. He would relish every moment of this. Ruining that man's precious son would be a wonderful treat on his stop through Konoha. Amusingly enough, whatever he might do would probably be kinder than what the aforementioned man had done by generously throwing his own flesh and blood to the carnivorous wolves within the village of Konoha. The fact that the blasted blonde had already practically cursed his son to a miserable fate almost made Orochimaru ignore the container and move on to the main course. There would be time for the Jinchuriki later. But alas, it was the damn blonde hair and blue eyes that would not let him part without leaving a little gift with the boy. After all, he didn't want to be second to the blonde man in any way, ruining his son's life included. Clearly Minato had set the bar very high. Orochimaru grinned and gathered his chakra into small dancing characters on the tips of his fingers. Surely the beloved fourth wouldn't mind if he fiddled around with his seal, would he? He pushed his entire weight into a sole five-fingered strike. A tight gasp of air escaped bruised lungs in a single painful exhale. The body under duress crumpled forward, boneless and blessedly unconscious. From above, the cruel man gave a lick of the lips. His work was nearly done. Only one last loose end to tie up. So many people were receiving presents of all kinds from the ever so magnanimous Orochimaru-sama. When he spied the furious and heated glares he was under, the snake Sanin could only sigh. This younger generation had no sense of appreciation. Soon they would see, most particularly, soon Sasuke would see. That beautiful thought brought a smile to the gold-eyed man's face once more. I would be back for you one day. His creepy laugh sent chills running over everyone's spines. However, at the moment, I have more pressing matters to deal with. Without another word, Orochimaru let the form slip from his grip and free fall to the earth, gathering fatal speed as it fell. A kunai halted the blonde's descent to the afterlife. Slowly, the golden gaze flickered back to his ultimate prize. A twisted smile filled his face, and he licked his lips as he felt the burning force of those red eyes. Yes, he was ravenous for the main course, and it was far overdue. Shino orgavem shaiki fuin, the muted throbbing of his head is what woke the blonde from his slumber. For a few moments he stared blearily at the brown interior of the cave. The smell of fresh grass and the oppressively hot muggy air assaulted his senses, leaving him bewildered. For a moment, the blonde was confused as to why he was bewildered by this information. After a seemingly immeasurable amount of time of blankly staring at the ceiling, his mind slowly returned and the impossible implications of his situation finally sunk in. Naruto. His head twitched to the side and he sat up slowly. Light green eyes bubbling with tears met his own cerulean ones and before he knew it he was embraced. Naruto, I'm so scared. She blubbered as Sasuke-kun got hit by the snake guy and he hasn't woken up and I don't know what to do. I tried to make sure you two were safe, but Sasuke-kun hasn't woken up and what'll we do if someone attacks and they hurt him? What'll we do? Sakura repeated herself unintelligibly as her crying almost reached hysterical heights. She kept together as best as she could. Now that Naruto was awake though, a huge part of her burden had fallen from her shoulders and the pent-up emotions were finally flooding out in her great relief. Surprisingly, Naruto hadn't hugged her back like she'd expected, instead he lay somewhat unresponsively in her arms. A waver of guilt filled her eyes. He must really be hurt. Are you alright, Naruto? She asked as she finally pulled back from her hug. The look in his eyes was dazed and he was surveying the surrounding area with such intensity it was as though he'd never seen anything like it before. It was disconcerting to say the least. By far, however, the most unnerving thing was his lack of volume. Naruto. Sakura hesitantly tried to get his attention. Fear that the enemy put him under a jinjutsu or that he had sustained head trauma began to build up in her heart. Finally those blue eyes landed on her. She was taken slightly aback. There was something strange. Certainly those were his eyes. Only Naruto possessed those deep blue eyes. Even the Yamanaka's pale baby blue shade paled in comparison to the deep royal blue her blonde teammate possessed. Despite the singularity of the feature, somehow she had the strangest notion that they weren't Naruto's. She shook her head to rid herself of the silly idea. The forest had made her paranoid. Sakura was startled as he slowly stood while she was still deep in thought. He walked slowly to their other teammate and the feeling of distrust welled up again. Hey, what are you doing? She moved to stand in the way of Naruto and her crush. Before she could make it all the way, she was cut off as he turned to face her and her breath froze in her throat under the pressure of those eyes. Reassurance radiated off of those familiar orbs in waves and she subconsciously moved towards the safe feeling. The steadiness of his gaze settled her heart and mind. For the first time since the start of the Chunin exams, she felt calm and peaceful. The placidity of his eyes emptied her body of distrust, and in its place, an immense sense of serenity invaded her. Underneath those watchful blues, she felt that everything would be alright. "What happened?" he asked her lowly. She blinked, breaking from her trance. He was fighting the snake guy." Her eyebrows pulled together in a stressed line. "That grass nin did something to Sasuke-kun. He hasn't woken up since then. Do you think he's going to be alright?" For whatever the reason, the fact she was seeking assurance from Naruto didn't strike her as odd in the moment. He nodded absently. "Is there anything else?" Sakura moved to shake her head but stopped halfway. "Well, there's the strangest bruise on his neck. I think the snake nin did it." A small stream of malevolent chakra was steadily leaking from the Uchiha's neck and Sakura shivered under the unpleasant sensation. Naruto remained unruffled and slowly maneuvered himself so that he was kneeling beside their unconscious comrade. Sakura watched curiously as her teammate carefully examined the strange markings on Sasuke's neck. The nervousness in her body had disappeared with Naruto's soothing look. All she could feel was content and warmth. Somewhere in a distant place in her mind, it registered that it was odd that she was so calm despite the fact they were in the forest of death. There were countless unseen enemy ninja out there ready to strike, and that her crush, and the strongest member of their team, was currently incapacitated. All those things seemed so unimportant at the current time. She watched the blonde prod the bruise a few times before taking a kunai to the raised neckline of the shirt and shredding it down for easier access. He sat there for a few minutes, a pensive look on his face. All the while, the black and purple energy swirled unpleasantly in the air. Naruto batted it away from his face every once in a while, seeming entirely unbothered by it. After some time, it appeared to Sakura that Naruto had reached a decision because he sat back and pulled his hand to the bridge of his nose in irritation. He rested there for a minute, all while mumbling several explicative statements all revolving around a certain reptile. The unusual motion for dealing with stress looked odd on his face, and it stuck out in Sakura's mind. Naruto's never pinched his nose before. It was odd. The more she tried to concentrate on that thought, the harder it became and the more unimportant the matter seemed. The fact Naruto was looking at her now was certainly more pressing than her silly wandering thoughts. "Sakura, will you help me?" The missing chan at the end of her name set off a short and dull alarm in her mind that something wasn't right, but it was soon swallowed by the sea of comfort she found emanating from his entire being. "What do you need?" "I require some of your blood." His expression never changed, not even for a second. She frowned. "There were very strict codes about allowing anyone to handle your blood if you could help it." In fact, she remembered all the rules and stipulations for the matter, having memorized them for a test. Naruto should know better than to ask. Belatedly, she recognized that she had no idea why he needed it. He noticed her expression and tacked on another thought with a serious and determined intent embedded in his voice. "Sasuke-kun needs your help right now. You're the only one he can rely on. Are you willing to do what needs to be done to save him?" Any and all of the slight shadows of doubt that had been flickering in and out of her mind were blown away by the bright burst of light his words inspired. She was entirely giddy with joy. Sasuke needed her. Sakura was helping save his life, only her. Ino would be blown out of the water. She could practically hear his cool voice thanking her persistently. After having a conversation with her he would realize what a beautiful and intelligent kunoichi she really was, and it would be inevitable for them to get together. In fact, marriage might be in her near future if Sakura played her cards right. She knew what she had to do now. Holding out a kunai eagerly, she put forth her forearm for him to use as he so desired. "Take as much as you need." He gave her an idyllic smile as he drew a short careful line along her skin. Crimson liquid poured out in little rivulets that crawled down her arms and dripped slowly to the dirt below. Her heart never sped up in the slightest, and there was still a faint smile on her face. Naruto was quick to hold out one of his hands to catch the flow in the shallow cup he made in his palm. "Put some pressure on that," he said idly. Without another glance in her direction he began to draw on Sasuke's neck with her blood in quick efficient strokes which could only be achieved by years of practice and application. Taking the same kunai from before, he sliced his own index finger and carried on in a similar fashion. The kunai was gripped in his teeth and a few times Naruto leaned in so closely that he would have nicked Sasuke's ear if he moved his head at all. Finally he stopped and leaned away from his comrade. As he took the kunai from his mouth, he examined his work with trained eyes. Naruto flicked his pinky to clear up some slightly smudged characters. After he ran over it with a fine-tooth comb and found nothing wrong, he was ready. "Sakura, when I say so, I want you to channel your chakra to your hands and put them on Sasuke. Do you understand?" With bloody hands he began to form a long string of complex seals. She nodded complacently and moved close as well. With a great palm thrust, Naruto slammed his hand into the 3 black dots. Dark chakra flared out furiously like a raging fire. The Kyuubi container grit his teeth and bore the brunt of it determinedly, saving Sakura from its wrath. Red lines skirted the floor, dashing over the area and covering a large radius. Upon close inspection, Sakura noticed that the red lines were actually columns of small, detailed characters. There must have been thousands. "Now Sakura. Put your hands on mine." Nodding steadfastly, Sakura complied. She dredged up the entirety of her small stores and gathered it in her palms before joining Naruto's efforts. Her meager supply was barely a drop compared to the rippling visible energy that twisted furiously around Naruto's hand. Despite that, she pushed herself to her limit, determined to do whatever she could. Beads of sweat were rolling down Naruto's forehead from the sheer exertion he was putting into the seal. A dry grin finally spread over his face as the lines of characters slowly began to crawl towards the point of origin. The labor-intensive activity was slow going, but he felt a glimmer of satisfaction nonetheless. When only a few inches remained of the red characters, suddenly there was a massive outpouring of chakra from the black marks Orochimaru left. It was a last-ditch effort, but Naruto refused to back down. He channeled enough chakra to level a mountain, drowning the purple force and bleeding it out like poison from a wound. But the final push, the lines completely congregated in a red, circular shape over the 3 black dots. The intensity of the dark color had been lost, and the 3 commas were looking fainter and grayer than before. Sitting back and wiping a sleeve over his sweat-soaked forehead, Naruto took a moment to bask in the afterglow of his success. The red circle covered the curse mark, surrounding it with innumerable interlocking characters. He'd like to see someone try and undo this. Not even the Snake Sannin would be able to even comprehend the structure, let alone attempt to circumvent or undo the seal. He allowed himself a grin of satisfaction and exhaled heavily in relief. Sakura also surveyed the product of their hard work. She didn't quite understand what had happened, and she found that the idea of finding out was very unattractive at the moment. What she did know though, was that the oppressive and harsh purple chakra from before had gone. That was enough to sate her curiosity and stop her questioning. "Come here, let me see your arm," Naruto said, shaking Sakura from her thoughts. The blonde ninja proceeded to rip off a small section from the bandages on his thigh that held his kunai pouch in place. With practiced hands, he wrapped her forearm tightly. He made sure to cover the small black ink that had just appeared and begun seeping into her bloodstream. He didn't have time to deal with it now. He'd just impress upon her mind that she wasn't to remove it. After he finished with that and told her repeatedly not to touch it, he pulled out one of his explosive tags. After pricking another finger, for the other slice seemed to have healed up, he began to modify the tag with his own blood. He made use to use his right hand because, like Sakura, his left now had a matching black ink in its tip. It would be gone soon, well, Naruto hoped. He shook his head to clear his mind and focused back on the task before him. "You were excellent, Sakura," he complimented her as he worked on the tag. "It's only because of you that we succeeded." A pink flush of pleasure surrounded her at the acknowledgement. She really had saved Sasuke, didn't she? A deep sense of pride welled up and she couldn't resist a happy smile. Naruto stood and began to scan the area for an appropriate place to put his finished work. He finally settled on a narrow opening on the ceiling of the cave. No one would know it was there unless they were looking for it. Satisfied with his choice, he channeled some chakra through it before a flash of dark pink blew out from every angle before vanishing from sight. "What did you do?" Sakura asked. There was some dull discontent hovering in the back of her mind. Though now that she thought about it, why should she care what Naruto was doing? It wasn't like it could be important or anything. It was so irrelevant that she decided she might as well put this in the very back of her mind. Naruto gave a small laugh, so unlike his normal boisterous tone, and indulged her question. "That was a barrier seal. It will protect this area from any outside attacks. No one will be able to get in, and there is a mild deterrent that naturally pushes people away from it. We'll be safe for a while." His promise was soft. "Really? That's a relief," the pink-haired ninja exhaled, feeling her mind further ease. At least they wouldn't have to worry about other ninja. "Yes, it will remain open for us 3 because we were in it when I activated it and the barrier won't push us away or affect us in any capacity." He scratched his head a little. "I don't know why I'm taking the time to explain this to you. It's not like you remember." He mumbled it mostly to himself as he walked out of the cave and into the clearing. The blonde stood in silence for a few treasured moments, simply taking in the fresh air and sunlight. "It's been a long time since I've been out," he spoke softly. Sakura's brow was furrowed. "What do you mean?" She kept trying to compose her thoughts, but the more she tried, the more tangled they became. He ignored her and took the deepest breath he could. "It's time to go back already," he hummed to himself. Eventually, Naruto began to walk back to the cave, but he took his time with every step. He knew it needed to happen, and he perfectly accepted it. Despite that, he wasn't exactly eager to go back in. He hadn't quite realized exactly how much he missed the simple feel of nature until this point. With one final look to the vast world beyond, he went back into the cave. Naruto wah. He cut her off cleanly. Sakura, thank you so much for all your help. I couldn't have done it without you, Naruto said with an honest smile. It wasn't as wide as his normal one, not as jam-packed and absolutely bursting with glee, but it was equally as genuine and earnest with emotion. It was nice to meet you, Naruto said. Before she could voice her confusion he made a few hand signs and she collapsed like a limp puppet into his hands. He laid her down gently and quickly dissolved the first genjutsu he cast. The memories of this incident would be buried deep within her mind, shoved away by her own subconscious. It truly was a beautiful jutsu. In a matter of minutes, she would wake from the second, which caused the receiver to fall into light asleep. When she awoke, she would be none the wiser about the events that had just occurred. He felt the tugging, dragging himself back under. Naruto lowered himself to the ground quickly and shakily so he wouldn't fall down and hurt himself. Just in time too, because dark spots were already dancing before his eyes. Namikaze Minato exhaled one last breath before falling away from the physical world and into the spiritual one. Naruto woke up in an unknown location. Where was he? The area he found himself in was bright, almost blindingly so. The strangest part of it was that the soft waves of light were an odd assortment of sherbet hues. Not that it wasn't pleasant, because in fact the sunny waves oozed warmth and comfort, but it was certainly a bizarre sight to awaken to. The 13-year-old ninja scratched his head and surveyed the area again, but discovered nothing but miles and miles of shimmering space. What was he doing before this? He thought on it for a moment before slowly the memories rose to the surface and he shot up. Wait. I was fighting that snake creep. Where were Sasuke and Sakura? Agitation invaded his body quickly and he began trying to figure a way out of the room. He ran and ran, expecting to run into a wall somewhere, but after several minutes, all he discovered was more empty space. Seeing as the floor beneath him was only one thing he could actually feel, he'd have to start there. Punching the floor did absolutely nothing, and none of his weapons had any effect in the slightest. There wasn't a dent or a scratch on the smooth surface. The floor was clear and just as transparent as the rest of the room. He couldn't make out a single bump or ridge that set it apart, he might as well have been standing in air. That thought coupled with the optical minfic that the wall-less ceiling-less room was giving him was more than enough to make Naruto nauseous. The teen shook the feeling off desperately. He needed to find Sakura and Sasuke. What if that grass nin was still attacking them? And here Naruto was, standing around and wasting time. Just as he was about to whip out the exploding tags, a gentle hand stopped him. It's alright, calm down, a voice said placidly. Naruto whipped around sharply to face his new enemy. Before he could even think to strike, every thought vanished from his mind. Blue met blue and the younger's mouth fell open. He knew that face. Hell, anyone in Konoha could tell you who this guy was. His face was on the mountain for God's sake. Why, you're the Yondaime. A slight smile appeared on his face. That's me. Silence filled the area as Naruto tried to reconcile this information with what he already knew. Minato waited patiently for him to gather his wit. The Yondaime knew it was probably quite a shock and couldn't blame the younger blonde for feeling at such a loss. Though when the minutes dragged on, Minato found himself scratching his head. You're dead. Naruto finally exclaimed. The accusatory note in his voice had Minato sweat dropping. Yes. Technically I am. There was suspicion in Naruto's gaze. Technically. Minato waved it off for the moment. It's complicated. Well, why are you here? The blonde boy hesitated. Why am I here? Wait, where is here? This is a part of your mind. There was a short pause, and the only movement was the soft shimmering of the pastel colors. It's kind of girly, Naruto said finally. Whatever reaction Minato had expected, it wasn't that. The fact that the teen had decided to comment on that of all things, instead of marveling at the fact of being in his mind or meeting the Yondaime who was for all purposes dead, made a grin appear on the older man's face and the sheer surprise made him laugh. His hand rose to smother it when he saw the disgruntled look Naruto was shooting him. I think it's great. I thought you would like it though. There's a lot of orange. Naruto fidgeted. I didn't say I didn't like it. Orange is the best color ever. After he spoke, he seemed to realize that he'd gotten off track. Don't distract me. I don't trust you. Minato held up his hands as a sign to show that he meant no harm. In his mind, he couldn't help but see Kushina in his indignant reply. A warm yet sad smile fell over his face. Naruto was too preoccupied to notice it. Why are you here? Naruto asked, and how come you're not dead? The Yondaime exhaled. That would take several hours to explain. It's a very long story, but I don't have a lot of time. You'll have to accept the abridged version for now. One day I'll tell you the whole story, okay? He promised. Alright, the teen agreed somewhat reluctantly. As you know, I am the one who sealed the fox into you, Minato began, trying to settle the figurative butterflies in his chest that were nervously gnawing at his innards. He didn't know how Naruto would react to this news if the complex and tumultuous look on his son's face as he talked about the Kyuubi was anything to go by. He was rightly worried. The yondaime swallowed and moved on. What you probably didn't know was that I also sealed some of my chakra in there as well. Naruto stared at him with blatant curiosity. Why did you do that? Because I wanted to meet with you, Naruto. How do you know my name? Why would you want to meet me? I was just some kid. I was just some orphan. Why do you know my name? The teen's emotions were building with confusion that fueled Naruto's anger and fear. You don't even know me. Naruto shouted defensively, angered at what he didn't understand. I should know your name. After all, I am the one who named you. The statement echoed in the wall-less space for what seemed to be an eternity. It can't be. The teen's blue eyes widened incomprehensibly. You're my father. The yondaime nodded. Yes, and Naruto, you're my son. It felt good to say those words aloud for the first time. The feeling was tainted by the fact he was putting his son through so much pain and distress. All he could do was watch the battle of emotions play across his son's face with bated breath. The Kyuubi container couldn't understand. He smiled and then frowned and tried repeatedly to assemble his thoughts into a sentence. I don't. Why it doesn't. Naruto gave a loud growl of frustration, and the next thing Minato knew he was doubled over. Naruto had thrown every ounce of his strength into a single punch, trying vainly to express the millions of conflicting emotions running through his mind. Why the hell did you seal the fox into your own son? Don't you know how hard it was for me? He exclaimed. I had no friends growing up. People always ignored me. No one cared about me except for Oyaji. Naruto was trembling violently. I can't. Tears were falling like fierce rivers down his whiskered cheeks. I don't know if I'm happy or sad. He finished finally. The fourth didn't believe he had any right to act like a father after everything he'd done to his son, but looking to the 13-year-old, he thought that perhaps that was what his son needed right now. Naruto was still shaking, and Minato did the only thing he could. The teen was still close from his punch, and Minato wrapped his arms around the trembling form of his son. He held the boy tightly, trying to let him feel the warmth and love Minato felt so fiercely for Naruto. Always, he'd never stopped loving this boy. I'm sorry, Naruto, he spoke softly, I'm so sorry. They remained there, in silence, simply trying to hold onto each other and cope with the new realities before them. Their peaceful moment was ruined by the upheaval of their environment. What's going on? Naruto asked as they were jolted out of their embrace. The ground was shaking below them, and he skidded a few steps to the side as he tried to keep himself steady. The strangest tugging feeling began to overtake his body, and he could feel himself start to slip away. There was a sad smile on Minato's face, and Naruto felt panic overtake him. He was losing his chance to talk to his father, and he knew in his heart it was unlikely he would ever see the man again. You're waking up, Naruto. Minato's voice was gentle. And none of it was fair. Because Naruto wanted to hear him say his name again and again. The teen wanted him to say Naruto until the sound no longer registered as a surprise. He wanted to hear him say it every day, 300 times, until it made Naruto absolutely sick. He wanted to hear that voice calling his name to wake up in the morning and to eat breakfast and take his shoes off when he came back and telling him welcome home every day he came back from his missions. He wished so badly that that kind of reality was an option. The fact it wasn't only made him cry harder. This would be the last time he would ever hear his father say his name. The thought was almost too much for him to handle. Dad, he said finally, feeling tears of a different kind build up. His words made a wide grin split over the yondaime's face. Naruto was startled by how similar the smile was to his own. He ran back into his father's arms. Will I see you again? Naruto asked, doing his best to resist the tugging. He was desperately trying to prolong their limited time. In his heart, he already knew the answer, but it didn't stop the slivers of hope that also resided there. Honestly, I don't know, Minato said truthfully, but he made sure to catch his son's eyes. But no matter what the case is, know that I'm proud of you and who you've become. The teen's eyes flickered uncertainly. These were words he was so desperate to receive, but upon hearing them, he found himself shying away and looking towards the ground. He was suddenly doubting the veracity of his father's words. It just didn't seem that they could be true. The yondaime placed a hand over his son's head and ruffled those familiar blonde locks. I am proud to be your father, Naruto. Minato did his absolute best to relay how much he truly meant those words. Really? Naruto was still hesitant, but he raised his eyes. Minato cursed every single person who had shunned his child and led to his sadly jaded outlook. Though he knew it all led back to him and his choice to seal the fox in Naruto. He would carry that guilt with him for the rest of his existence. If only the fallout of his decision could have landed solely on his shoulders, instead spreading onto Naruto's. But such was not the case. All that he could do now was try and show Naruto that he was loved. Because he dearly, dearly was. Minato gave him an honest smile. Yes. Heartfelt joy started to build in the teen's chest. The tugging grew fiercer, and he found his image of the scene slowly disappearing piece by piece like an unraveling jigsaw puzzle. No. He wasn't ready to say goodbye. Dad. The image of the yondaime became distant and disjointed. The last image he saw was his father mouthing those last and most precious words to him. It wasn't fair. He wanted to hear them. He'd always wanted to hear them. The glowing, warm place, filled with pastels and acceptance, faded into black. When Naruto opened his eyes again, he found himself being shaken fervently. "Naruto. Wake up." The voice was shrill, and it took him a few moments to assimilate back to reality. Sakura was the one shaking him. Sasuke sat a little ways off, observing the scene, but not making a movement to help. "Sakura-chan, what's wrong?" he asked dazedly. "Finally. You were really worrying me," she admitted, but she backtracked when she realized what she'd said. Sakura didn't want to make Naruto think she was interested. "Well, I wasn't that worried, kind of annoyed really." She qualified her statement. She hadn't needed to worry because Naruto still wasn't quite awake yet, his mind was torpid and hazy. "What happened?" Naruto queried. "After you got knocked out, Sasuke-kun fought off the grass nin. I haven't seen him since, so I think we're alright for now." Sakura peered out into the dense forest, as if any second the snake summoner would appear again and attack. "Why were you shaking me so much anyways?" Naruto asked. "I thought we were in danger or something." "You were crying, Naruto," Sakura replied, marginally softer. Instead of the loud and defensive reply she'd expected, her teammate merely faced the ground, a shadow covering his face as he remembered his dream. Most likely it had just been fanciful thinking on his part. As if the fourth Hokage would actually be his father. That was every orphan's dream, he bet. His eyes moved to the sunlit clearing outside of the cave wistfully. It had been nice though, for those few minutes, feeling claimed. That sense of belonging was bittersweet in that it had only lasted for a few precious minutes. He shook his head to clear his thoughts. He couldn't afford to get caught in those kinds of fantasies right now. He needed to focus on the exams. There wasn't much time until the second exam ended and they needed to complete the objective as soon as possible. "What was it about?" the Kunoichi asked hesitantly. The concern in her voice honestly touched him, but he had no desire to share something so personal. He looked up, a large fake smile spread over his face. "Raymond. It was such a great dream. I was bathing in bowls and bowls of it. It doesn't surprise me that I was crying tears of joy." "Baka. You would have a stupid dream like that," Sakura declared. Once more she was feeling mildly upset with the concern she had for the blonde idiot. Every time it proved unfounded. Unlike Sakura, Sasuke simply stared at the orange-clad teen and his eyes narrowed in suspicion. The expression on Naruto's face froze. The mask he'd shoved on wasn't as convincing as normal. His emotions were still in flux from the rollercoaster his dream had set him on. The Uchiha watched him for a while longer. Normally he would call the idiot on it, if only to prove his own superior powers of observation, but the honestly scared expression on his teammate's face stayed his hand. Instead he just clucked his tongue. "You have such cheap taste. Not that I expected anything else from a dope like you." The gratitude that flooded Naruto's eyes was almost too much for Sasuke. He felt uncomfortable under that gaze. It wasn't as though he'd done anything that special. "Sasuke team. You're just in denial about the glories of the world's best food." "HN," Sasuke replied, only because he wanted to end this false conversation early. The dobe's head wasn't in it, and neither was his. They didn't have time to waste keeping up with appearances. If Naruto wanted to pretend everything was fine, then so be it, but Sasuke wouldn't let it get in the way of the exam. Not when his promotion was on the line. Not when that next rung on the ladder was before him, the ladder that would lead him to Itachi. "So, what should we do next, Sasuke-kun?" Sakura turned to his guidance. The Uchiha considered their options for a few moments. "First things first, we need to get food and water. After that, rest and recovery were next on the list." Sasuke grudgingly admitted the fact to himself that he still needed time to heal and regain his chakra. It was clear to see that Naruto was in similar shape, which was odd indeed because the blonde was usually a volcano of stamina. Sasuke supposed it just went to show how tough of a fight it was against the grass nin. Inwardly, the Uchiha recognized that perhaps he had a smidge more respect for the dope after seeing him go up against the snake summoner, not that he'd ever let his teammate know that. "We should set up a temporary base camp. We'll have to find and secure a safe area. After food and water, getting sleep should be our top priority. The scrolls can wait until tomorrow when we have more strength." Sakura nodded along with his words and waited for him to finish before putting in her own 2 cents. "Let's set up our base here," she suggested. Sasuke frowned at the thought. "No, we've lingered here too long already. We need to find somewhere else." Though the Kunoichi was tentative about contesting it, she felt it was her duty to do what she could to ensure their communal safety, extra emphasis on her crush's safety. "Really, I know this is a safe spot. Please, let's stay here." The unusual occurrence of Sakura not agreeing with every word that came out of his mouth was enough for him to look at her questionably. Her insistence at staying here was also suspicious. I agree with Sakura-chan. This is a safe place," Naruto nodded along. Looking at his two companions carefully, Sasuke gathered what little chakra he had and activated his Sharingan for a few seconds. He frowned. There was no Genjutsu to be seen. Just to be safe though. Ow. Would you hit me? Naruto demanded, rubbing his head. Do you still think this is a safe place to stay? Sasuke demanded without preamble. Yes, Naruto replied, disgruntled. Uchiha let out a sigh. So it really wasn't a Genjutsu. I was just checking something. Sasuke team. Naruto growled, but he was pointedly ignored and glared at by Sasuke and Sakura respectively. Why do you think this is a safe place? He asked Sakura. She paused for a moment. Well, so far I haven't seen any enemy ninja in the trees or surrounding areas. The fact that our cave is low to the ground makes it less likely anyone will find us, and it offers us shelter against the elements. Also, the fact that there's only one entrance makes it a prime area because it's easier to defend. She stopped before adding cautiously, and I don't know why, but I'm sure this is a safe place to be. Right on every count. With no trace of a Genjutsu, Sasuke was finding it hard to think of a reason for them to move, especially as weak as they were. Those were very good points. Not to mention that it was Sakura who had been guarding them all this time and thus had spent the most time in the environment. She would naturally know more about the location. Not only that, but the calmness of his teammates' trust in the area was contagious, and Sasuke had a hard time resisting it. They needed calm desperately. Alright then, we'll set our camp here for now, he agreed. Sakura lit up at his words, beaming with pride at her accomplishment. Perhaps she should put in her thoughts more often. Sasuke had certainly been impressed, even if he hadn't shown it visibly. Sakura could tell from his tone. The Uchiha subtly moved away from her excited and girlish energy with a shudder before he continued talking. I don't think we should separate after what happened last time, Sasuke rubbed his neck absent-mindedly. So while it'll take longer, it would be best to stick together and do things one at a time. Naruto muttered something unpleasant under his breath, but Sasuke didn't particularly care at this moment. It was frustrating, they were all irritated, but they still had to do it. With the matter settled, they decided to start by finding a river. Luckily they stumbled across one sooner rather than later. After refilling their canteens and drinking as much water as they could, they moved on to the rest of the essentials for their night in the forest. The process of finding food and firewood was tedious and mundane. The three grit through it though with more efficiency than usual. All of them were too concerned about their closing window of time to bicker as they normally did. They decided they would make a plan of attack tomorrow. For now, they would have to try and rest while they could. It was easier said than done when you were camping in an area called the Forest of Death. They returned to their cave after doing a careful patrol around the perimeter. After a sparse dinner of berries and some fish they'd caught at the river, the three were more than ready for sleep. They quickly set up a schedule for who would stand guard. Sasuke and Naruto got the first and last shifts respectively because they needed the sleep the most. Sakura had readily agreed to have the less desirable middle one without any complaints. Sasuke sat back in his usual casual position as he scanned the scenery. The seemingly at ease form denied the fact he was alert and ready to act at an instant's notice. Naruto scoffed inwardly. Sasuke thinks he's so cool even when he's just keeping watch. What a team. With that final thought, the Jinchuriki allowed himself to drift off to sleep. Meanwhile, Minato lay on his back in the familiar pastel room staring at the ceiling, or perhaps, lack thereof, as there was no way of ascertaining its existence or location. His lips were pursed in a frown. Since his son had left, the yondaime had been running the entire happening over and over in his mind, taking apart every second of it and trying to figure out if he had said all the right things and done what he should have done. Normally, Minato was not the kind of person who would fret over his past actions. He was generally a determined sort of man who acted with a deft, decisive hand. Preparation had instilled him with security in the past, and that coupled with his many years of experience in combat and his sharp mind, meant that he was usually able to think his way out of any problem and come out alive and the victor. The aforementioned confidence was nowhere to be seen because he had no clue how to deal with Naruto. Really, he had all this time in the world to sit and think about his son. He'd gone over the scenario countless times and he thought he had imagined every reaction. It didn't seem to help one bit because there was no preparing for actually seeing him. The rushing emotions meeting him brought had dashed any and all planning Minato had done. Naruto looked so tall, so grown up. Minato lamented the lost time they'd never be able to have. Hopefully he'd done alright. He had to cut himself some slack because he severely doubted he could ever have anticipated that he would be in the position he was. It truly was a delicate and surreal one. The yondaime wished he'd had more time to talk to Naruto. There was so much he wanted to tell his son and so much he wanted to ask about. He was starved for any personal information from his son. While Minato existed in his mind and was able to catch wisps of Naruto's life when power shifted his direction, it couldn't compare to actually having a conversation with his son. There was a distinct difference between watching a person interact and interacting with them personally. And that massive distinction lay heavily on his mind. He also wanted the chance to explain everything. A sigh escaped his lips. He'd have to wait until the hopefully never-occurring situation where Naruto would let out the Kyuubi in order to talk to him again. Minato was probably a bad person for slightly wishing that day would come, though he honestly hoped that his son would never be driven to that point. The thought of Naruto being in that much pain made Minato's stomach flip. He'd just have to do what little he could with his small range of power. Helping keep the Kyuubi's chakra in check was what he did best. Whenever it got too much, he'd pull what little red energy he could back into the seal in order to prevent the Kyuubi from leaking out too much. Naruto's chakra pathways weren't developed enough to handle very much of it. Other than that, Minato was miserably unfit for offering any kind of assistance, much to his intense dismay. Well, that was before now. Something strange had happened today. One minute he was enjoying his eternal stay in his son's mind, and the next, the scenery changed and the chakra flow was diverted so strongly and swiftly that it temporarily threw open a window into the central system of Minato's son's body. Naruto was deep asleep. The teen's absence created enough space for Minato to maneuver himself with his new burst of chakra and take control for a moment. Mild distaste settled in his mind as he remembered what Orochimaru had done to his son. The fact someone tampered with his seal made Minato's hair bristle, and he would have been more than delighted to use his momentary freedom to hunt down the snake summoner, dismember him, and then beat him to death with his own detached limbs. Sadly, that matter had to be set aside. The state of the Uchiha had taken priority. That seal was dark. While he wasn't entirely sure about the schematics, he had a basic understanding of what it would do, and he had needed to address it quickly before it settled all the way. Though perhaps he should have used the time to observe his son's seal, but he knew he made the wisest choice. He had faith that the third or Kakashi would be able to remove the five-pronged seal from Naruto, while only Minato could seal the curse mark. While it pained him to ignore his son's condition in lieu of another's, he knew it was crucial to catch Orochimaru's schemes before they grew out of control. But the altered flow of his son's chakra concerned Minato the most. For whatever reason, the area where he resided was receiving more energy through some mad fluke in the universe. The extra energy was certainly welcome, but the implications of what it meant regarding the rest of Naruto's system were serious. Considering that Orochimaru had placed an odd-numbered seal on top of his even one, he knew the result was that it twisted up the distribution and flow of his son's chakra. It was good for Minato, but extremely bad for Naruto's already poor control. Somehow, he'd have to do something about it. A wry smile spread over his face, and he shut his eyes lazily. He had plenty of time to think about it. Hopefully, he had made the right choice. Minato was somewhat comforted by the thought that he'd at least been able to avert an Orochimaru-driven disaster that would have manifested in his son's teammate. He had taken a great risk through implicating his son and Sakura into the seal. The outcome and effect it would have on the blonde and pink-haired teens was something not even he was sure of. Hopefully nothing would happen. His idle mind suddenly snapped to attention, and his eyes flipped wide open as a new realization occurred. Shit. The fourth resisted the very tempting urge to bang his head against the invisible floor. He'd forgotten to explain to Naruto what he'd done to his teammate seal. A frown settled on his face. His son would have a rather shocking time discovering what had happened. Minato could imagine how Kakashi's and the Sandame's faces would look as they tried to puzzle that one out. No one would be able to piece together what happened to the curse mark or decipher his seal. Of that he was certain. There was also the fact that there seemed to be no logical explanation for how the curse mark was sealed in the first place. The matching marks on Naruto's and Sakura's skin would also be another point of immense confusion. In the short time he'd been in possession of his son's body, he really had made a bit of a mess. Had he really helped out his son in the long run? Minato let out a groan. Anything regarding his son made him more uncertain than he'd ever been in his entire life. The approach of another surge of chakra drew Minato's attention, and he finally sat up. He was beginning to get used to these bursts of energy. Perhaps if he stored up his energy he'd be able to make another appearance to his son. Eh? What am I doing here again? Minato turned around so quick it made him dizzy. No, he had not been imagining that voice, because in all of his orange glory, Naruto stood before him, back turned and scratching his head in confusion as he looked around the familiar room. Naruto. All the emotion the yondaime possessed had poured into that single, charged word. Naruto turned to face him, astonishment on his face. No way. The sheer hope and disbelief in his son's eyes was enough for Minato to break out in a huge grin. With a running start, Naruto barreled towards him. He warmly accepted and reciprocated Naruto's energetic hug, relishing the feeling of holding his son again, even if it was only a spiritual manifestation. I wasn't expecting to see you so soon, but I'm so glad I am. Minato pulled away so he could look into his son's eyes. It was real? Naruto asked, still staggered from the shock. It wasn't just a dream. You really are his voice cracked. Yes, it was real, Naruto. The yondaime was nearly beyond words in the face of an event he never thought he'd be able to experience again. "I'm here." His father's soft earnest smile wrought relief, and a glow of happiness slowly built and surrounded Naruto in a bright aura. After a few moments, the teen compassed his thoughts clearly enough to start processing the events properly and search for answers. "How is this happening?" he asked as he let go of his father and took a small step back. Minato's expression grew businesslike. "I trust you remember the ninja that attacked your team." There was no need for clarification. Only one person could be that shinobi. "Well, that ninja's name is Orochimaru, and he is one of the 3 Sannin, who are some of strongest shinobi alive today." Naruto's attention was rapt and he swallowed harshly at the words. He'd been able to sense exactly how dangerous the snake guy was, but it was only now that the reality was really settling in. They had been inches away from dying. It had only been through luck, pure, dumb luck, that they had survived. It was strange to him that when he was actually dealing with Orochimaru face to face, he had felt none of the rampant fear he felt now when he looked back on it. When he told his father that, the older man just laughed. "You're the type of ninja who performs best under pressure. That's a wonderful quality to have, and it'll be a great asset when you start doing more dangerous missions." His smile spread widely. Naruto blushed under the praise and ducked his head slightly, though the brimming smile on his face was clear for Minato to see. "Anyways, back to the main point." Minato guided them back to Naruto's question. "He hit you with a powerful sealing jutsu." Naruto scrunched his nose as he remembered vaguely studying seals in class. "Seals keep things in, I don't see how it let you out." "You see, Naruto, the seal you already have has another function besides containing the Kyuubi." The yondaime noticed the slightly dark features on his son's face with a grimace. Nonetheless, it was apparent he was listening quite closely. "One of the reasons your seal is so amazing, as opposed to other Jinchuriki." "Other Jinchuriki? Wait, you mean there are more like me?" Minato nodded. "One for every tailed beast, or Biju as they're called." "How many Biju are there?" Naruto was hungry for information. More like him. He wasn't alone. Had they been through what he had? Had they felt the consuming loneliness? "There are 9 in total," Minato explained. "It's believed by many that the more tails the demon has, the stronger it is." Following that logic, the Kyuubi no Kitsune would be the strongest of all the Biju. Because the powers of the tailed beasts are so strong, the only way to hold them is to seal them into human containers. Those containers are referred to Jinchuriki. Minato's face grew dark at using that locution to describe his son. It's an old term that doesn't mean as much now as it did then, but it translates to human sacrifice. The translation made him queasy, but the teen swallowed and tried to focus on other aspects. Naruto filed away all the information into his mind, trying desperately to ingrain every bit of it. When he finished the exam and became Chunin, he'd see if he could find one of the other containers. He just had to know. "One of the functions of the seal is that it integrates some of the fox's chakra into your own supply." Naruto blinked. "Would you do that? Isn't that a bad thing?" "Not necessarily," Minato spoke slowly. "With the extra chakra, your reserves are greatly improved and it enables you a tool to use in order to become a stronger shinobi. The seal filters the Kyuubi's chakra, so it's a milder version, so that you can slowly adapt to the poisonous nature of it. The effect of that is that you won't be overwhelmed later when you deal with larger quantities." "Larger quantities? Is it gonna get worse later?" Glimmers of fear shone in Naruto's eyes. He had dealt with only a fraction of the Kyuubi's energy, and it was so much. Remembering the fight on the bridge and the sheer rage and power he had felt made him shiver. The idea of dealing with more of that twisted, wicked energy was suffocating. Minato's expression grew fastidious and serious. "Naruto, the Kyuubi is both a curse and a gift. Many seek the power of the Biju, and oftentimes in the past, the Jinchuriki have been a part of many political gambits and used as weapons of mass destruction in wars. Their mere presence is often used to dissuade wars from even happening due to the immense threat they pose." Upon seeing his son's flickering and uncertain expression, he lowered a hand to his shoulder. "However, I never intended this kind of life for you. The Jinchuriki before you was still alive, and the thought that this would happen had never even occurred to me." He banished the painful thoughts of Kushina from his mind at the moment and made sure to catch his son's eyes to drive the point home. Naruto wasn't a political chess piece, and he never wanted him to feel that way. "You know the Sandaime would never use you like that." The teen had to agree there. A small smile spread over his face at the mention of the man he viewed as a grandfather. His father's next words only solidified the point further. "Sarutobi and I both know that you are Naruto. You aren't the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki, and you aren't the demon, you're Naruto, my son." The teen's eyes widened. There it was again, that feeling of belonging that he'd never even dared to hope for. He wanted to shy away from it. If he folded and basked in it, Naruto knew he would just crave it that much more. Who knew if he would even have a chance at feeling it again? The very thought of it being ripped away from him after having it caused an ache more painful than any abuse. He didn't know if his heart could take it. Minato, who was ignorant to the battle playing within his son, casually ruffled Naruto's hair. Don't worry about it. Unknowingly, he'd made the decision for the teen because once more, Naruto found himself leaning into the touch. He was unable to resist the warmth. Perhaps it would be alright to indulge for a little while longer. Wait, why didn't he ever tell me about you? Naruto asked, his brow was furrowed. Minato ran a hand through his own shaggy hair. Well, I can only assume it was to protect you from my enemies. Naruto stared at him uncomprehendingly. You see Naruto, after the Kyuubi's attack, Konoha was severely weakened, the fourth explained, there was a very real possibility that another village would try to take advantage of that and attack Konoha while it was recovering. No one else had to pretend not to be related though. There was still a frown on his face. Well, I had a few more enemies than others. The older blonde scratched his cheek. Understatement of the year. In fact, I was hated very much by an entire foreign village. The fact I died made them all very happy, but the absolutely shocked and horrified expression on Naruto's face that made it clear how unspeakable and ridiculous that idea was to him almost made Minato laugh. But many of them lost out on their chance for revenge against me. There was pain in Minato's face. Even considering the possibility of what could have happened made him sick. If they knew I had a son, they would shift their grudge to you. Sarutobi knew that, so I assume that was probably why he hid my relation to you from you and the public. When his father put it that way, Naruto had a hard time contesting it and getting angry. Still you had that many enemies. The awe in the teen's voice knocked the serious mood clean out of the ballpark. Yes, the yondaime replied with a small smile at his son's behavior. It couldn't hurt to brag a little bit. I was in the bingo book and the order was to flee on sight if I remember right. Stars gleamed in Naruto's eyes. Wow, that's the coolest. Now the fourth really did laugh. His son's energy and attitude were entertaining and heartening. He hated having to draw it to a close, but it was imperative that he explained what was going on. Alright, it is important that you listen very closely Naruto, Orochimaru made in addition to the seal I made. Minato brought them back to the main topic. He probably wanted to make molding chakra more difficult for you. And why the Snake Nin wanted to do that probably had more to do with Minato than it did with Naruto, which made the yondaime groan in his head. The result is that your chakra system is extremely altered. The pathways have been disrupted and it causes the chakra that normally flows to one section of the body to rush to other places. So when you attempt to mold the chakra for a jutsu, it's 10 times more difficult because the chakra is flowing in dozens of different directions at the same time. Naruto looked a little confused at his explanation, but that wasn't the thing he found most puzzling. What does that have to do with me meeting you? Minato smiled now as the cogs whirled in his mind. If my theory is right, then one of your major pathways, perhaps one that led to part of the brain stem or the pineal gland. Minato cut himself off as he realized he'd started thinking out loud and his son's eyes had grown glassy. Anyways, one major chakra pathway that leads to the section of your brain that produces dreams has been diverted to this section of your mind where I can spiritually manifest. The teen blinked. What? It basically means that more power is coming this way instead of going where it normally does when you dream. So when I dream, I end up here. Naruto asked, simplifying it to its very core. Minato nodded. That about sums it up. Why didn't you say that to begin with? Was the impression the yondaime gathered from the younger blonde. You think it'll stay this way? The Kyuubi container couldn't keep his nervous energy from leaking into the question. I'll keep coming here when I dream. A gentle grin spread over Minato's face. So long as nothing disrupts the seal or changes, I think so. Naruto slowly grew dazed and numb as he gradually realized what that would mean. We'll be able to talk about so many things, anything you want, Naruto. Minato was equally excited, already imagining all the things he wanted to share, the battle stories, his ascension to Hokage, the traditions. Kushina the yondaime forced himself to turn away from that last fact. He wasn't sure if he was quite ready to breach the subject himself. There wasn't a doubt in his mind that sooner or later, Naruto would ask. It was only natural. But for the moment, hopefully he'd be spared the topic until he was better equipped to deal with it. Can you train me? Naruto's eager question broke his chain of thought. Minato blinked. Well, how would that even work? Come on, you just have to. Naruto begged, giving him large and beseeching eyes as he ditched any and all of the maturity he had shown before. Please. The yondaime chuckled. Minato would have to figure out how to go about the training of course, but how could he resist it when his son asked him like that? Yes, I can train you, yada. Naruto was jumping in the air. This was an absolute dream come true. His idol who now was his father of all things was going to train him. He didn't know which part he was happier about and settled on celebrating the entire thing. Ma, Naruto. Minato tried to catch the other blonde's attention before he got too carried away. I can only train your mind. You have to do the physical aspect of things yourself. That realization didn't take a single bit of wind out of Naruto's sails. It'll be a piece of cake doing the physical stuff. I've always been good at it. Beyond Aim had witnessed many prime examples of his son's words, and he could only laugh. Saying Naruto was good at it was another one of the largest understatements he'd ever heard. His son was an absolute powerhouse of stamina. Don't laugh. I'm serious. The teen exclaimed, a slight pout settling on his face. Minato just ruffled his hair again. I believe you, he said honestly. Amusement still pulled at his lips. Before Naruto could utter a complaint, a distinct tugging feeling cut him off. It was coupled with the rumbling of the invisible floor, though it was less violent than it had been before. If Naruto had to guess, he'd say Sakura was waking him for his shift to keep guard. He gave a small shocked laugh. He had almost forgotten the outside world existed when he was here with his father. Speaking of, his eyes flipped towards the older blonde. Despite the fact that there was proof supporting the fact he would come back, he was unable to stop the fear from building up. Minato was feeling similar, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he gave his son a wide and confident grin. I'll see you later. Naruto bit back the uncertainties that were on the edge of his tongue. Why yeah, see you. Within seconds, Naruto had disappeared from the bright room. The silence was so unsettling without the presence of the loud orange teenager. Minato found himself already missing it. He sighed at the loss before flipping himself on the ground to continue his hobby of staring at the debatably existing ceiling. The fact he had been able to see his son again was something he hadn't even dared hope for, and yet, it had happened. Beyond Aim couldn't keep the smile off his face. The idea that more meetings were very likely made him so happy it was ridiculous. They'd accomplished so much more this meeting, and he wondered what they could do the next time. There were a lot of subjects he wanted to broach with his Naruto, so it made sense to plan ahead. He wanted it to be a bit more organized so he wouldn't overwhelm his son with questions, and so he would be able to start instructing Naruto with at least a vague idea on what he wanted to cover. Naruto's training was something he'd have to think about for a while. There was so much to teach him. He wasn't sure if his jutsu could be taught using theory alone, but there was plenty of other stuff that they could work on as well. Traps, battle strategy, politics, stealth, tracking, history, everything needed to enable his son to reach his full potential. If Naruto did that, then there was little doubt in Minato's mind his son would achieve his dream and become Hokage one day. The happy smile only spread wider. Kushina would have been so proud to see what he'd become. Minato had a moment of silence as he remembered the love of his life and all of her energy. He wished so badly she could have been a part of this. Beyond Aim had an epiphany and sat up in excitement. He could teach Naruto Fuinjutsu. That would be wonderful to keep Kushina alive and a part of Naruto's life. Having Naruto become a seal master would also give him a large leg up in the world. Fuinjutsu was practically a dying art. The fact he would have a skill that his opponents didn't have would undoubtedly give him a major advantage. There were very, very few true seal masters left. In fact, the only one Minato had ever met was Jiraiya, and he knew that the Toad Sage had never known another one either well, besides Kushina and Minato. His wife had sealing in her blood. The main practitioners of the art had all lived in Uzushiogakure, and most had died when the land was destroyed. The rest were spread out around the Fire Country, so a large part of the art had been lost. Minato was a seal master himself, but was obviously incapacitated at the moment. He could preserve it by instilling it in his son though. Naruto would love sealing, Minato could already tell. It was one of the most useful tools. Not only due to the very good example that lay on his son's stomach, but also looking at how useful it had been on his teammate Seal. Minato caved and banged his head against the invisible floor. He'd forgotten to tell Naruto what he'd done with Sasuke's seal. Again. The only thing Minato could do was cross his fingers and hope nothing too strange would happen before he explained the situation to his son. Knowing Naruto's luck, he doubted it. After Sakura had woken him and made a quick move to her sleeping bag for the second time that night, Naruto began to contemplate things. Mulling over the entire experience in his mind still left him awed and almost in denial that something so amazing could really be happening. In fact, he did weigh the possibility it was just a string of dreams that only fueled one another, but he was comforted by the fact that Minato had spoken about things he could never have known about or even imagined, the other containers for one thing. And also, Naruto smiled softly. And also, that warm feeling of belonging was still there. He didn't think he could generate that on his own. He didn't know if he even knew what it felt like before now. Nodding to himself, he decided to accept this new reality. Though he had expected scoffing from the more cynical part of him, it never came. Acknowledging it felt even better than he thought it would. Light and freeing in a way Naruto couldn't really explain. Besides, what would it take then for him to believe it was true if not the information he could never have dreamed up? He spent the rest of his shift floating on cloud 9. Already, he was fantasizing about all the cool new jutsu his father would teach him. Learning about the rest of his family was also something he was looking forward to. Questions about his mother teetered on his lips, and the idea that he would be able to ask sometime made him grin. Eventually, the rest of his team woke up. Groggy and irritated, they were still in better condition than they had been last night. What are you so happy about? Sakura grumbled, noticing the cheerful expression on Naruto's face as they ate their meager breakfast of nuts and berries. The blonde rocked back on his heels and smiled to distract her from the truth. Just glad to be alive. I've got a good feeling about today. He really did. Everything from here on out would be better. He just knew it. Sakura smiled and replied, I know what you mean. We'll get that scroll today. 2 seconds later, Sakura froze at her words and Naruto scratched the back of his head and gave her a slightly odd look. Sakura was panicking inwardly. Why had she said that? Unbeknownst to the other two, Sasuke had barely resisted the impulse to express his similar feelings on the matter. He had wrestled with the urge and had been forced to bite his tongue to stop himself. That feeling of confidence, however fleeting, had lifted his spirits to soaring heights. He truly felt that things would be better and happier. The sensation was fleeting and regretted his weakness in giving into it. Outwardly he snapped at the other two to be quiet. They couldn't afford to waste time on talk like that. They had a mission to do. Right now we should see if we can find another team who's weakened at the moment, Sasuke started, drawing Naruto's and Sakura's attention back to the impending danger of the forest and their trickling amount of time. Naruto, make some shadow clones to scout out the area. The blonde made a face at how Sasuke took charge, but he began gathering his chakra nonetheless. It was not without a small grumble of, who died and made you Hokage. A swirl of rebelliousness overcame Sasuke and he wanted to challenge Naruto. What are you going to do about it, huh? Once more, the words had been on the tipping point, just about to spill out, but he bit them back with no lack of effort. Just like before, the urge and feeling vacated his body so suddenly it left him startled and bewildered. Catching the frozen look on Sakura's face, he knew she had experienced something similar. Sasuke cleared his throat, trying to shove whatever happened out of his mind. Sometime today would be nice, dope. He received a mild glare from Naruto, but the majority of the blonde's focus was centered in his chakra channel. Give me a second, he said, that snake bastard Orochimaru fucked with my chakra system. It's a lot harder to get control of my chakra. Finally, he managed to create about 30 clones and they departed into the forest to scan the area. Meanwhile, Sasuke and Sakura exchanged confused looks. Orochimaru? The Kunoichi asked. Is that his name? The blonde stopped suddenly as he realized what he'd said. The nervousness he felt was palpable, but he smiled weakly anyways. Yeah, I read it in a book somewhere. He's the only guy who summons snakes, so Naruto was lying. It was blatantly obvious. Sasuke knew it for a fact. The blonde had always been easy to read. Though he gathered this knowledge through a new medium aside from his observation skills this time. Sasuke had been able to feel the lie. He ran a shaky hand through his hair. That shouldn't have been possible. From the expression on Sakura's face, he knew he wasn't alone in this new situation. He frowned. They really couldn't afford to think too hard about it though. Perhaps the forest was finally getting to him. Sasuke cautiously dismissed the occurrence from his mind. The trio had sat around the cave, all wrapped up in their own thoughts. The air was uncomfortable as each of them tried to puzzle out the disconcerting feelings racing about. When a Naruto clone descended from the trees, the feeling ceased and things settled back to normal. The sudden change made Sasuke and Sakura start slightly. What is it? There are a group of ninja near the river about 300 meters from here, the Naruto clone reported before poofing out of existence. Sasuke was torn between wincing and grinning. 300 meters was fairly close. They had been fortunate they hadn't been discovered by the enemy ninja. Quietly, the Uchiha thanked whatever luck it was that had allowed them to be unnoticed. Now Team 7 had the opportunity to get the jump on them and turn the exam around. What's their status? The Uchiha asked. Sasuke and Sakura turned to their blonde teammate. They both sighed as they realized the replica had already dissolved. Naruto was ignorant to their looks and instead scratched his head thoughtfully. It looks like they're recovering from a fight. Silence greeted his answer. Is there something on my face? The blonde asked as he registered the shock and noticed the looks he was receiving. How do you know that, Naruto? Sakura asked. What do you mean? The container didn't understand the question. She means, dope, how do you know that when the clone already dispersed? Sasuke said impatiently. That stopped the blonde as he tried to backpedal and understand how he had gotten the knowledge. I don't know, he finally said. The cogs in the Uchiha's head were turning. The conclusion here each seemed impossible, but at the same time, it explained a lot. Can it be that you remember everything that your clones know? Sakura asked, reaching the same answer. Huh? Dope, get rid of another one of your clones. The curt order made Naruto glare, and Sasuke responded in kind. Stop glaring at Sasuke-kun, Sakura snapped, unknowingly making a matching expression. Naruto acquiesced to Sasuke's order, though not happily by any means. Where was your clone? Sasuke asked. He was near Ino, Shikamaru, and Choji, he replied automatically, before what he said finally caught up to him. How did I know that? You remember everything your clones learn. Sakura tone was surprised as they confirmed the theory. This entire time you never noticed. Sasuke rubbed his temples, trying to combat the urge to hit Naruto for his stupidity. Of course Naruto didn't realize he was gaining extra knowledge every time a clone dispersed. This was Naruto they were talking about after all. Naruto exclaimed, "Hey, you never noticed either. I wasn't the one making the clones, Usura and Kachi." The sense of annoyance sat heavily in his mind and he didn't know why he was getting frustrated with Naruto so easily. The stress of the exam must have finally been sinking in. "We don't have time for this." Surprisingly, it was Sakura who said it, "Can we just finish the exam already? I'm tired." The pink-haired Kunoichi grew quiet and disheartened. "I really just want to go home." The sadness in her voice was palpable. The sense of homesickness hit Sasuke with a hammer and he found himself also wishing he could just be home too, curled up in his bed. He shook the thought violently from his mind, revulsion taking root. They were ninja and ninja didn't get homesick. Not only that but they were on the field. They all knew better than to cave to feelings like that. Well, perhaps Sakura and Naruto didn't know all that much better, but Sasuke certainly did. So then why am I feeling this way? Sasuke frowned and turned his mind towards the exams. When they finished, they'd get this all figured out. They couldn't focus on this right now whatever this was anyways. Then let's get this taken care of. We'll survey the area and figure out a plan for attack. Sasuke had anticipated some derisive snorts and comments from his blonde teammate, but was pleasantly surprised when he found an equally determined expression on his face. Gathering their belongings, the trio carefully and rather slowly, due to Sasuke's and Naruto's poor condition, much to the two boys' frustration and dismay, made their way to the riverbank. Thankfully, the enemy team had yet to leave or pull themselves together anymore since the clone had last seen them. Observing them from the safety of the thick trees, it became apparent that the foreign shinobi were starting to crack under the pressure of the exam. Team 7 watched one of their members, a red-headed man, curse up a storm as he argued with one of his companions. The scroll was in his hand and he waved it furiously at his other brunette teammate, as if trying to make a point. Sasuke shared an uneasy look with his team. "Something's fishy about this." Naruto trailed off, knowing something was askew. What it was exactly had escaped him. The sense was pervasive though. Sakura nodded, though she had put the pieces together already. Arguing with one another with the scroll out in the open, it's almost too perfect. They're either plotting something or they're really just inexperienced, the Uchiha murmured, mostly to himself. They look like they're really hurt to me." The Jinchuriki squinted as he tried to see the details of their enemies. "They could be using a henge," Sakura reminded him. Sasuke had reached a similar conclusion and without another word he channeled chakra to his eyes. Sharingan. The results made him purse his lips even more. "What do you see, Sasuke-kun?" Sakura stared at her crush with stars in her eyes. Sasuke-kun was just so cool. A strong wave of affection blindsided the Uchiha and he found himself scrambling to recover from the whitewash. I don't see any signs of a henge," he spoke unusually ineloquent. What the hell was that about? There was a dopey grin on Naruto's face and it only furthered Sasuke's confusion and suspicion. "What's the plan?" The pink-haired girl ushered the answer from him. Sasuke tried to gather himself back together, but all this emotional upheaval left him in a state of disarray. "We should try to get closer and see if we can figure out why they're arguing. It might be useful information." "Right," Sakura nodded her head. "Sounds good." Naruto mirrored her tone perfectly, earning him two slightly bemused looks. The blonde didn't bat an eyelash. "Then we pummel them." Sasuke rolled his eyes. "No dope, then we plan again." "Plan to pummel them." Sakura and Sasuke sighed and shook their heads in synchronized exasperation. After a quick and sharp lecture from Sakura, which was more of a verbal smackdown than anything else, the team had decided to send a Naruto clone in a henge of a small animal to get closer. The risk factor for injury was practically at zero, so despite the fact that there was a possibility their cover would be blown if the henge was revealed, they settled on that option. It took Naruto a couple tries to get his chakra in order, but he succeeded eventually. Due to his miserable control, thanks in part to Orochimaru, he created 10 instead of just 1. Thankfully, his teammates remained quiet as he dispersed the extras, leaving just 1. Sasuke and Sakura went over the plan with the two Narutos again. Both of them rolled their eyes and exchanged empathetic looks with each other before the clone followed the orders. Or at least tried to. This time it seemed the clone couldn't get enough chakra gathered. Naruto could feel their impatience and it mixed poorly with his own frustration. Finally they saw a cloud of smoke and heard a popping sound. Naruto blinked at the miniature orange fox that appeared at their feet. The clone thought he was being awfully funny, didn't it? Naruto was half tempted to kick it over and make it disperse, but thought better of it. He settled for glaring at the copy of himself fiercely. In reply, the fox scrambled behind Sakura's legs in a mock show of fear. The fact it was sticking out its tongue rather ruined the effect. "Naruto, knock it off," Sakura said unhappily as she tried to get the clone fox away from her. "Better move on, dope, we don't have all day," Sasuke snapped with equal irritation. The fox hissed in sync with the original, but the former finally slunk away with all the stealth and quickness of its breed. The trio watched with bated breath as the furry creature scampered to the river to pretend to drink. Hopefully the foreign nin wouldn't know that foxes weren't indigenous in Konoha. They used to be, but the majority had been wiped out after the Kyuubi attack. The small creatures had brought up too many bad memories, in addition to being a convenient outlet for the anger. Sasuke and Sakura each wanted to punch Naruto and shake him repeatedly. Of all the creatures he could have picked, why the hell did he choose that one? So far things seemed to be going alright. The two arguing teammates were still shouting at each other, blind to anything else around them. After a few minutes, the third shinobi of the group, a mauve-haired Kunoichi, came back from gathering firewood. It quickly became clear who was the strongest, at least tactically, on the team as she scanned the surroundings clinically. Her eyes settled on the little orange fox lapping the water from the river. Before any of them could blink, she had thrown a kunai with deadly precision. The ears of the orange fox pricked up. The sound of an approaching kunai was enough to startle the rodent. In a way that was almost comical, the little creature fell face first into the river, inadvertently missing the kunai. The pathetic show and keening of the wet fox as it was being swept away was proof enough, and the on-edge Kunoichi slumped as her fears had been unfounded. She wearily turned to her two teammates who had finally noticed her appearance. Team 7 quickly and quietly departed down the river where the fox had traveled. Sasuke smirked slightly. He couldn't have planned that better himself. They reached a shallow section just as the Naruto fox pulled itself out of the water shakily, looking like a thoroughly drowned rat. The replica undid the hinge, but before it could speak, Sasuke tossed a kunai at the clone and effectively dispersed it. "Why did you do that?" Naruto rounded on him with a stormy expression. Sasuke bit back the anger that welled up and instead kept the boiling water under wraps. Displaying a calmness and nonchalance he didn't really feel, he just scoffed. "It's quicker this way." "What did you learn?" Naruto's mouth opened in realization. Sasuke could practically feel the dumb surprise coming from his teammate and resisted the urge to shout at the dunce. The blonde took a few moments to sift through the collection of new memories. "Did you figure out what they were arguing about?" Sakura asked, trying to urge the knowledge out of her teammate. "Ah, yeah," Naruto said finally, "one of them wants to open their scroll, and the other doesn't." The pink-haired girl furrowed her brow. "That's against the rules though. Remember the first exam, Sakura?" The Uchiha reminded her, the objective was to cheat without getting caught. "Those foreign ninja probably thinks it's the same trick. What do you think?" The Kunoichi's blind trust forced Sasuke to look away. Normally he barely noticed it and didn't mind all that much because it made it easier to accomplish their goals. This time though, he could practically feel the complete faith. That sensation was moderately disconcerting. "I don't think we should open it," Sasuke said finally. These rules didn't have the same subterfuge as the first exam. Last time, the rules guided us to arrive at the conclusion that cheating was the objective. This time the rules seemed to be pretty solid. Besides, it seems unlikely that they would try the same trick twice. Sakura nodded in understanding, catching on to his train of thoughts. Sasuke looked upward and assessed the approximate time. The sun would set in a few hours. They needed to hurry and get the scroll so they had adequate time to make it to the tower. "Let's watch the other team and wait for a chance to strike." The trio moved quietly back to their original stakeout point to observe the team. Even from far away, Team 7 was able to tell the tensions were still high amongst the group. Sasuke smirked. Exactly what he was hoping for. While waiting, the trio sent a Naruto clone to go find them food and double-check to see if their small encampment had been discovered while they were away. They had made sure to hide any traces of their existence while they were gone, but nonetheless, a skilled tracking nin could always find it. The discovery that Naruto retained his clone's knowledge revolutionized their planning. Sasuke's mind was whirling with all the applications and clever ways they could utilize the ability. Naruto would instantly be able to relay knowledge from thousands of meters away upon the destruction of the clone. No chance of collateral damage when exploring or investigating, and flawless recall. It was a perfect jutsu. Sasuke was itching to learn it himself, but he remembered what Kakashi said about how much chakra it used. Reluctantly, he had to admit that using that much would probably put him out of commission or practically deplete his chakra storages, making the remainder of his jutsu worthless. No, it was wiser to continue to have Naruto use them for the team's use. The dobe had chakra to spare, and Sasuke wasn't the kind of person to let that be without using it to their advantage. Besides, he had a feeling that the only one who would teach him would be Naruto, and he couldn't allow the blonde to think he was superior in any way. Night began to fall, and Team 7 was starting to feel the dull boredom that came with staking out an area for hours. Naruto repeatedly moved into fits of complaining, asking why they couldn't just pummel them now, and griping about how uncomfortable it was. A few hits from Sakura did the trick for shutting him up. It probably was because they were staking out and it was taxing on the nerves, but Sakura wasn't feeling any better after taking a few swings at the blonde. Usually it gave her an outlet to let off some steam and calm down some. Now it just made her feel even worse than before. She couldn't help but feel that the forest was chipping at her sanity. Thankfully, after dark fell, they didn't have to wait very long. They watched the group crouch near each other and discuss what Sasuke assumed to be the guard shift. It only made sense for them to leave the scroll with a single person who was awake. They could see the Redeed furiously shouting at the brunette man, whom they now assumed had the first shift, probably threatening him. The other nin scoffed but said something to mitigate his teammate. After an hour, just to make it more likely that the other two nin were really asleep, it was time for Team 7 to make a move. So what do we do now? Sakura whispered. Mulling the matter over in his mind, Sasuke frowned. He didn't like the setup at all. It seemed too perfect. The entire thing could possibly have been a show meant to trick them from the very point that they stumbled across the camp and saw the fight. Despite that, the foreign Kunoichi's reaction suggested otherwise, but that also could have been planned. Sasuke frowned. He was either underestimating their tactical abilities or severely overestimating them. Whatever the case was, they needed to strike now before they lost their chance. Before Sasuke could make a decision as to how they would attack, he noticed the faintest shimmer around the edges of the foreign shinobi's outline. His eyes widened and he quickly activated his Sharingan. Just as he thought. The other ninja had created a mud clone to take his place before sneaking away. Sasuke's suspicion that it had all been a setup from the beginning waned when he realized that the enemy nin's two companions were solid and genuine. Scanning their immediate surroundings, he noticed a faint hint of chakra further down the river, but it was nowhere near where Team 7 was positioned. Only the brunette shinobi had made a clone and snuck away. Could it be possible? That ninja's just a clone, he informed his teammates absently as he deactivated his Sharingan and began forming a plan in his mind. The original is about 100 meters southeast. What? Naruto exclaimed, irritated. Naruto, this is a good thing, Sakura spoke as if she was giving a lecture. This means we can attack him 3-1. Alright. Let's get him. The blonde smiled excitedly. When we get there, stay and wait for my command. The Uchiha mostly directed this to Naruto, and the latter scoffed and looked away. The excitement of actual confrontation was too much to sour his mood though. Unlike her teammate, the idea of confrontation made Sakura's heart beat nervously in her chest. Despite how many times in the academy she'd gone over scenarios like this, she was so unsure it made her tremble. The reality of the situation coupled with the very real threat of danger made it clear to her how inapplicable and inadequate those word problems were. Really being in the situation was nothing like that. There were so many ways the enemy could react, countless variables in the setting, weather, weapons, sun position, time and everything. There was no preparing for this harsh world she had signed up for when she was a little girl. This certainly hadn't been what she imagined, nor aspired to. Sasuke was the only thing on her mind, not actually accomplishing the missions or surviving life-threatening conditions. She had become a ninja to stare at her crush every day. In the end, she had gotten her wish. Sakura was on Sasuke's team and every day she could, and did, stare. The reality of that was also nothing like she had thought it would be. The reality of the situation was that she was deadweight. That was 1,000 times worse than being the dead last, who had proven to be invaluable many times over. She hated Naruto simply because despite how poorly he had done at the academy, he was proving to be a far more competent ninja than Sakura was, and that wasn't fair. She studied so hard. All she wanted was for Sasuke to see how brilliant she was. Her plan seemed to have backfired spectacularly as time and time again, she had to be saved by not only Sasuke, but Naruto as well. Gritting her teeth against the bitter taste on her lips, she promised herself that if she survived this exam, she would train. Sakura would train harder than any Kunoichi even had in the history of the world. No more shying away from hard work. First she would surpass Naruto and Ino and everyone else who stood in her way. Then she would take her rightful place besides the Uchiha where she belonged. With that goal in mind, she steeled herself to the task ahead of her and vowed to be as useful as she could be. She was startled out of her musings by a firm clap on the shoulder by Naruto, who matched a determined look on her face with one of his own. Taken by surprise, she didn't have time to react negatively, or at all for that matter, because the next thing she knew, they were heading out after the nin. She followed after her two teammates in textbook single file. The first thing she heard on arrival was a slightly manic laugh. Fools if they want to be. I'm done playing this stupid game. Sasuke's eyes narrowed as he quickly took in the situation. The brunette foreign ninja was inches away from pulling the outer seal off of the scroll. He's gonna open the scroll. Sakura exclaimed in a barely hushed tone. Yosh. That was all the warning Naruto gave before he started running in, 20 clones appearing and following right after. They quickly began to engage the enemy in an all-out brawl. Sasuke let out a hiss as he batted away the immense frustration and consequential migraine that dealing with his blonde teammate always brought about. Idiot. He let out a long sigh. We have to salvage this mission. Come on. Sakura nodded with resolve. Unlike Naruto, who had run in headfirst, Sasuke circumvented the situation so that he was hovering on the edges of the foliage at an angle to their enemy. The nin hadn't noticed them yet due to Naruto's brash behavior, and Sasuke took advantage of that distraction to slowly begin closing the distance on his side. Sakura, apply a deterrent ninjutsu, Sasuke murmured lightly into her ear. Giddy and amative shivers worked their way across Sakura's skin. Sasuke nearly shouted in alarm as he felt similar pinpricks. The resulting blush sent him spiraling into mortification. He shook his head desperately, trying to clear the fog and distraction all the oscillating emotions had caused. What the hell? Naruto exclaimed. The Uchiha jerked his eyes that way in apprehension. Naruto was fine, despite the distinct flush of red, that is. A slow and horrifying idea was beginning to form in his mind, but with the enemy only meters away, he was forced to lock his jaw and push it aside. After this, they would settle things. They had to settle things. Any more of this and Sasuke was going to lose his mind. While he had been occupied with his perturbing thoughts, Sakura had quickly applied the Genjutsu as Sasuke had instructed. Thankfully, she had missed his fit of rosy cheeks. If she hadn't, Sasuke was certain he would have offed himself then and there from the sheer embarrassment. Uchihas did not blush. The purpose of the Genjutsu Sakura executed was to direct the target's attention away from the attacker. The effect was that the foreign shinobi was slightly dissuaded from looking in their direction. It was a basic D rank, but invaluable in missions that required inconspicuous action, such as investigation. In the end, the jutsu might have been pointless because Naruto was kicking up such a fit to the 12th power as there were a dozen replicas reacting similarly that Sasuke seriously doubted the enemy ninja would stop staring at the spectacle that was their teammate anytime soon. It wasn't until they were just a meter away and Sakura's foot landed awkwardly and accidentally knocked a pebble aside that the foreign shinobi noticed their existence. As Sasuke spotted the stiffening of the enemy's posture, he was already moving in with a kunai. The target's reflexes were enough to block Sasuke's attack, but they weren't enough to cover the punch delivered from his blonde teammate from behind. With a few more quick jabs delivered by Sasuke, the enemy was down for the count. Naruto let out a cheer, and though both teammates smiled in mirroring relief, they quickly realized that the danger of the situation had not ended. Swiftly and silently, the trio dragged the body into the underbrush in case one of the foreign nin's teammates came looking for him. Within the weapon's pouch, they discovered their prize. A heaven scroll was held reverently in Sakura's hands. Sasuke quickly raided the unconscious man's supply of items, pleased to find a couple ration bars, some wire, shuriken, and kunai. The somewhat large collection of explosive tags was a surprise though not unwelcome. He quickly divided them with his teammates. Afterwards, Sasuke and Naruto promptly abandoned the body back where they fought. Sakura tried her hand at a sleeping jutsu, hoping to keep him knocked out for a day at least. Sakura's chakra was practically exhausted, so she couldn't firmly assert that it had worked. Despite that, she hoped that because he was already unconscious and most likely had a concussion, mostly due to the direct blow from her blonde teammate and his power-packed right hook, the Genjutsu would work and he would stay under. Not only would that cripple his team in manpower and put them at a tactical disadvantage, but it would also ensure that he wouldn't come after them. Their anonymity could save them a lot of trouble in the long run. Nodding to each other and exchanging hard-earned smirks in Sasuke's case, the trio quickly departed to their temporary encampment. The trip back was eerily quiet as each of them was wrapped up in their own thoughts and the puzzle of the recent happenings. Sasuke quickly directed a quick circle around the perimeter of the clearing. Finding nothing was wrong, the three reconvened at the base of the cave. Staring at each other, the anxiety that had slowly been building up all day was finally being let out. The combined collection of the three's feelings was like undamming a tsunami of fretfulness. The rush swept over them, raising their heartbeats and thoroughly unsettling their thoughts. What's going on? Sakura finally asked. The fear in her voice joined perfectly with the boys'. Naruto shook his head jerkily. I don't know. The frustration mixed with the distress. The two feelings complemented each other in a miserable combination. I'm having these feelings, and they aren't my own. Sasuke spat out the words like them were venom. Me too. Naruto fidgeted uncomfortably. I think they're your emotions that I'm feeling, Sasuke said with narrow eyes as he stared at Naruto and Sakura. It took a few moments for the statement to actually sink into his teammates' minds. Naruto stared incredulously. Like what, we're sharing emotions? That's stupid. Do you have a better explanation? Sasuke asked tetchily. It could be a Genjutsu? Sakura suggested, wringing her hands. Without a word, Sasuke activated his Sharingan. Just like before, he was coming up with nothing. He had suspected as much. Sasuke would have noticed it when he activated it before. Making sure it didn't hurt and double-checking was never a bad idea. He delivered a swift whack. Damn it, Sasuke team. Stop hitting me. Stop yelling at Sasuke-kun. The rush of anger the Uchiha felt confirmed his fear that it wasn't related to a jutsu. I'm checking for Jinjutsu, you idiot. Well, Surity. Naruto sarcastically replied, it might help a little if you said something first. You should already know this, dope. Team, just calm down. Sakura cut through their argument. Stop it with the anger, I can't deal with it. Sasuke forced himself to take a few deep breaths and saw Naruto copy. I guess it's safe to assume that we aren't in a Jinjutsu. Sakura stated at last. Sasuke sighed. No Jinjutsu. Silence reigned for several minutes, the group simply absorbing the information and trying to grasp what was going on. So for whatever reason, we're sharing emotions with each other? Sakura asked, the question was still laced with doubt. Sasuke nodded grudgingly. The truth of the matter was undeniable. It's possible that Snake Ninja Orochimaru, he corrected, did something to us. What did he do to you, Naruto? Sakura asked, all I saw was him hitting you in the stomach with some weird chakra. The anxiety he was feeling betrayed his calm and nonchalant words. I dunno, he just messed up my chakra system. I don't think that has a lot to do with what's going on with the three of us. Sasuke scanned his teammate. He was hiding something, but what he'd said felt true at least. Weighing the matter in his mind, Sasuke decided not to push the subject right now. He would later when they had more time and weren't in a survivalist competition. So, if it wasn't to do with him hitting you with that chakra, then what was it? Sasuke asked slowly. Though the team had recognized the problem, that in and of itself turned out to be a taxing and arduous ordeal, figuring out the cause was turning out to be more puzzling still. The trio ruminated over the matter, and it was several minutes before Sakura finally snapped her fingers in realization. Her delight at possibly figuring out what happened morphed into an awkward and nearly fearful minced. The two boys stared at her with perplexity. What is it, Sakura-chan? Naruto asked, as he tried to shake off the apprehension that was settling around them. She hesitated a second more. Could it be what he did to your neck, Sasuke-kun? Reflexively, Sasuke's hand shot to his neck which still ached from the attack. Naruto stared between the two with a confused expression. What happened to Sasuke's neck? That Orochimaru guy she stumbled over her words, trying to find a better way of putting it. He bit me and then ran away, Sasuke finished bluntly. The statement sat in the humid forest air for a few moments before it was joined by the guffaws of the blonde ninja. What? Naruto asked with a quivering smile. He had to hear Sasuke repeat the side-splitting sentence. A few chuckles forced their way past Sasuke's lips before he could stop them. It isn't funny, he tried vainly. Thinking about the strange occurrence, it was rather funny. Why the snake summoner picked masticating him out of all the other things he could have done, Sasuke would never know. He gave you a hickey, that was his ultimate attack. Naruto began giggling and Sasuke chortled even more. The light and mirthful exchange didn't last for very long because a new and overpowering anger began to build from the pink-haired Kunoichi. It isn't funny, Naruto. She shouted, do you know how scary it was to see that happen? Naruto quelled from her wrath, but Sasuke responded with a dose of his own anger, shhh. Sakura, shut up. You'll give away our position. She immediately wilted and settled back into a meeker state, abashed at her angry behavior. Why do you think the emotions flip like that? Naruto asked his teammates. You know, like why did it go from funny to angry? Chen. That was a good question actually. All of them were forced to stumble around in the dark as they tried to figure out the edges and corners to their new situation. Maybe it's whatever emotion is stronger. The pink-haired Kunoichi put in thoughtfully. The logic seems sound. They didn't have an exact way to prove right now, so it was tentatively agreed upon for the moment. Sasuke in particular decided to file that theory away for further analysis. Perhaps if he was getting overwhelmed by his teammates, he could try to fight back with one of his own emotions and smother the two of them instead. He needed some way to stop all the bleed-through. It was driving him up the wall. So what's the deal with the bite? Naruto asked, bringing the matter back around. I'm not sure. My neck kind of hurts, but otherwise I think I'm fine, Sasuke replied. Lemme see. Naruto grinned foxily as he moved near his teammate. He wanted to see the love bite. Whoa. Sasuke, there's something here. What is it? Sasuke shifted as he tried to see for himself. It's sort of like Naruto's words failed him as he observed the complex red diagram on his friend's skin. It was shaped like a circle, and within there were thousands of characters in seemingly random order crisscrossing it. Below that, he could make out the faint outline of 3 Tomo. It looks kind of like a seal, Sakura put in with equal confusion. Orochimaru must have done it. That's probably the reason why then Sasuke's mood dropped to freezing point. As if he needed another reason to hate the snake summoning bastard. It was clear that Orochimaru was to blame for this entire situation. Fuck. Naruto summed up the entire thing aptly. The other two sighed. What now? Sakura asked. We need to finish the exam first off. Then we talk to Kakashi about this, he might be able to undo it whatever it is. The choice wasn't a pleasing one for any of them, but it wasn't as though there were a lot of options. For now, it seemed like they would have to put up with each other's moods until they found an earth scroll and finished the second exam. Easier said than done. I think the best thing we can do is try and keep a lid on our emotions. Sasuke knew that Kami couldn't have picked two worse people to put in this situation besides Sakura and Naruto. The blonde in particular had influenced them the most by far with his radical and extreme moods. Sakura was nowhere near innocent though. All the infatuation and over-emotional responses made him nauseous when he even thought about it. It's a major distraction having everyone's feelings running around in our heads, so we need to be careful, Sasuke continued, trying to press the importance of keeping control of their emotions. The duo nodded, but all of them knew exactly how difficult it would be to stop all the emotions leaking out. The night was already upon them, so it was obvious that sleep was in order. Before they could even figure out an arrangement for a guard shift, the sound of talking sent all of them on high alert. They quickly backed into the crevices of the cave, hiding themselves from view. A group of 3 foreign shinobi exited from the trees. "Don't know why it's taking you so long." The voice was definitely male, and the irritation he felt was rampant. "Shut up. It's harder than it looks." A female voice replied irritably. The Konoha trio watched with bated breath and tightly grasped kunai to see if the foreign nin would approach them, but they were moderately surprised to find them walking cleanly around the perimeter of the clearing. It was suspicious to say the least. Was it possible the enemies hadn't noticed them? They could make out the vague forms of the people. The girl had long straight locks, and one of the boys had spiky hair, and the other, "It's the guy that attacked Kabuto," Sakura whispered in remembrance. These guys were the ninja from the Sound Village. "Hurry up and find the Uchiha brat, Kin. I'm sick of this forest," the spiky-haired boy said. His words sent massive ripples out to Team 7. Sakura felt panic swell in her chest. Looking for Sasuke-kun. But why? "Sakura, calm down," the Uchiha hissed, trying to stabilize his rapidly beating heart. "Right, sorry." The embarrassment and apology in the air was enough. With a few deep breaths, the static in the air began to settle down. Luckily, the other ninja appeared not to hear. "Ugh. I don't understand why I can't find him." The female of the group, whose name was apparently Kin, cursed, "All the tracks lead here, but it just cuts off so suddenly." "Clearly you aren't trying hard enough," the boy shot back, annoyance clear in his tone. "Did you want to give it a try, Zaku?" Kin shot back venomously. "Your tracking skills are absolutely pathetic. I don't even know why you got put on this mission. Because someone has to fight when we catch the Uchiha. I know, that's why I'm here." "Perhaps it's more to do with keeping up with appearances," Kin said with a cruel smirk. "It would be awfully strange to only have 2 teammates, and someone probably has to drop out to keep suspicion away." "You stupid bitch." Zaku hissed in reply. The girl just gave a cold laugh as she watched him steam. "Shut up," the ninja that looked like a mummy finally spoke with a low voice. Out of the 3, he seemed to be the most level-headed by far. "Orochimaru-sama won't tolerate this kind of behavior. Keep it together, you two." The 3-leaf nin shared a brief flare of surprise and nervousness. Everything seemed to come back full circle to the snake summoner. All of them were wondering what his deal was with Sasuke. The Uchiha had never met or even heard of the man before yesterday, and suddenly he was a very active presence in the events occurring around the young clan heir. Eventually, the sound of the enemy shinobi's voices moved away from the group, moving towards the river. Team 7 remained frozen for 15 minutes, no one felt comfortable moving after their close brush with danger. It was only after Sasuke pulled on the Sharingan and did a brief scan and confirmed there was no Jinjutsu did the 3 finally step out from the shadow of the cave. Sasuke growled at his low chakra supply. Activating the Sharingan as much as he had, even if it was only for a few seconds, was more taxing than it should have been. After this he would be training for certain. "What the hell does that snake bastard want with you?" Naruto grit out shakily, still feeling the aftereffects of the apprehension from before. Wouldn't Sasuke like to know? It was frustrating seeing the enemy clearly creating plans to do something with him and not knowing a single detail or explanation about it. The big question on his mind though was what their aims were. What did they hope to gain through finding him? "This place is compromised." Sasuke tried to rearrange himself back into the cold and clinical shinobi mindset. Easier said than done when the sharp teeth of his teammates' emotions, nervousness and bewilderment were gnawing at him from the inside. "Should we send a clone to scout for another location?" Sakura asked her crush. The black-haired boy shook his head. After their near encounter with the enemy, Sasuke didn't want to spend another minute here if they could avoid it. "We can't stay here any longer." His stony attitude was hard to argue with. All of them were still wary of what had just happened, so in no time flat, they had cleared the area of their existence and prepared to leave. Sasuke squinted at the red edifice at the horizon. The Sound Ninja had headed towards the river, which meant their best bet was to start moving the opposite direction. Sadly, this meant towards the tower, where there would no doubt be several teams waiting to ambush them. Still, that was less intimidating than the 3 Sound Shinobi and their unidentified, though no doubt malintended, plan for him. Sasuke quickly relayed his thoughts to the other two, but the distracted air around his pink-haired teammate forced him to clear his throat. He had never actually needed to get her attention. "We're leaving, Sakura." She nodded distantly and spent a few more seconds staring back at the cave, as though there was something more to it, something more that Sasuke couldn't see. She gave the slightest incline, almost like a bow, before her gaze moved back to the present. Without another word, they exchanged quick, though exhausted, nods and took to the trees. Orochimaru-sama. Head bent low, Kabuto kneeled before his master. "Kabuto." Orochimaru's grin was still delighted from his work earlier that day. "How did Sasuke-kun do?" The Sannin awaited a positive response. There had never been a doubt in his mind that the youngest Uchiha would reach and surpass every expectation put before him. The hatred in those eyes told Orochimaru everything he needed to know about the boy. An avenger trying to kill his brother. Seeking strength from hate one time or another, he would end up before Orochimaru. The curse was simply meant to speed things up. The snake summoner had enough faith in the boy's acrimony to count on his presence in the near future. If everything went as planned, he would have a Sharingan at his disposal before the next year. Sasuke possessed such beautiful hostility channeling that it already made him quite the prize indeed. With Orochimaru's nurturing, the potential was unimaginable. Yes, Sasuke was perfect. So when he noticed the gray-haired teen hesitating, he felt an inimical surprise build. Could it be possible that Orochimaru had miscalculated? Zaku and Dozu were unable to track them. The silence was like stagnant water. Yes, that certainly had not been something Orochimaru calculated. That equation never entered the frame. Kin was the one of the greatest trackers in sound. She had tracked Hunter Nin before. There was no way that 3 genin could escape her senses. Perhaps the Sannin had merely underestimated their strength. Then again, there was always the chance that an outlying force was behind this. Was it possible that Kakashi had gotten involved? The feeling in Orochimaru's stomach told him that the latter was extremely unlikely. So then what happened? He hesitated. "Orochimaru-sama, there is a possibility that your cover has been blown. It might be best if you disappeared until the final event. I shall stay and investigate in your stead." Kabuto spoke lowly and kept his head bent and eyes averted. Whenever trying to suggest anything to Orochimaru-sama, it was wisest to do so as delicately as possible. The Sannin was prone to openly display how he felt about the advice people gave him. It was taken directly as an insult if not handled with extreme care. Kabuto felt more than comfortable in his standing with the Sannin, but that didn't mean he wished to tempt fate. So when Orochimaru thought on the matter for more than a moment, Kabuto let out a breath. "Perhaps you are right," Orochimaru said. The displeasure was easy to see. "I'll lay low, for now. See that you find the boy and report to me on the status of his seal as soon as you can." "Of course, Orochimaru-sama. And do make sure he passes this exam," the snake summoner said. "I want to see him firsthand in the finals. I think he'll prove worthy of the mark." A wide smile spread over Orochimaru's face as he thought of the prospect. "As you wish, Orochimaru-sama." Naruto slumped against the wooden doors of the towers in his exhaustion. His teammates weren't far behind him. Iruka's dramatic revelation of their passing grade was the frosting on the cake that had been full of adrenaline, stress, and tenseness. To finally be rid of it left him feeling empty and in need of a recharge. "We did it," he commented belatedly. A weary smile was turned his way. "Yeah," Sakura agreed. Sasuke shook his head. "If it wasn't for Kabuto giving us that last scroll, I don't know if we would have made it." Naruto rolled his eyes. "It doesn't matter. We won." "Naruto. This isn't like a game," Sakura scolded. "Yeah, I think I had that one figured when I got swallowed by the giant snake," Naruto trailed off, making his teammates exchange looks over his head. "Anyways, the point is, we made it. Now let's eat. I'm so starved I could eat one of those big-ass snakes." "Naruto, the last thing I want to think about is snakes at this point." Sasuke nodded in agreement. Yeah, I just can't wait to eat some Ichiraku ramen." 10 bowls at least. There was a large puff of gray smoke, and a familiar Jonin stood casually in the dispersing gas. "Kakashi-sensei." Sakura said in surprise and greeting. "Hey look, Kaka-sensei. We finished the exam, and we had time to spare. How awesome are we?" "It was all thanks to my superior ninja skills," Naruto said, as he nodded in agreement to his own words. The irritation he felt building was enough of a clue that he should duck while he had a chance. He barely missed Sakura's fist by a hair's width. "You're such a liar. Without Sasuke we all would have been dead meat." It's cause of Sasuke that we had that stupid snake freak after us to begin with." Kakashi blinked. Snake freak. There were only 2 ninja who were adept at snake jutsu. He'd heard about Orochimaru's confrontation with Anko. Was it possible that he had gone after his genin? Why would he Sasuke? "A snake ninja certainly sounds interesting," Kakashi commented with a falsely idle air. "What were they like? I'd be interested in knowing which village they came from. Very few people use snake jutsu." "Orochimaru?" Sakura asked, missing the subtle widening of Kakashi's lone eye. Well, he was seriously strong. We were lucky to make it out alive honestly. Yes you are. Kakashi spoke slowly. I can't impress upon you the importance of who that man was, but you cannot speak about this to anyone except the Hokage and I. Believe you me, we understand how strong he is, Naruto said, more mutedly than before. He's like one of the 3 strongest ninja ever, right? Yes, I'm surprised at you Naruto. I didn't know you read up on that sort of thing. Naruto shuffled a little nervously. Yeah, well, I used to spend a lot of time in Oyaji's office. Lots of papers floating around. Kakashi frowned slightly beneath his mask though he appeared indifferent on the outside. Were any of you hurt badly? When the 3 genin exchanged looks, Kakashi felt his stomach clench. What happened? Well, that snake guy kind of bit Sasuke and where did he bite you? On the neck. There's some kind of seal mark there. And there was some kind of seal mark, but it wasn't like anything Kakashi had ever seen before, and it certainly wasn't anything he expected from Orochimaru. He had expected a curse mark like the heaven. Wait, he could make out the faint outline of the curse of heaven mark below the large red one, but the strength of that seemed almost entirely eclipsed by the red crisscrossing characters. That wasn't quite right though. Kakashi uncovered his Sharingan eye to capture the full extent of the movement. It didn't just seem to eclipse the mark, it really did eclipse it. Every entry and exit level for the chakra of the mark was being captured and locked down before it even met with Sasuke's. He noticed the kids were flinching and staring nervously at him. He hadn't meant to scare them by pulling out the Sharingan. What happened after Orochimaru bit you? He asked with an unreadable expression as he recovered his eye. I passed out from the pain, Sasuke grit out. Yeah, and Naruto got knocked out too when he did something funny. Sakura quickly added. What did he do to you? Well he put these glowing purple Y things on his fingers and then slammed me right in the stomach. His aversion to meeting eyes clearly informed Kakashi exactly where on the stomach Orochimaru had hit him. You're alright. Yeah, besides my chakra control being lots worse than normal, caused the chakras running all over the place. Kakashi was slightly surprised at how seemingly knowledgeable his student was about his body and his own chakra flow. I'll fix that for you. Naruto nodded for a few moments until the implications of his sensei's statement registered. If the seals that Orochimaru added to his stomach were what allowed him and his father to meet, then removing those seals would mean no. He shouted hastily, startling his teammates and his sensei. No? Kakashi asked, his eye narrowing at his student's suspicious reaction. Well I mean Naruto scratched his head nervously, scrambling to make up some reason for Kakashi not to tamper with the seal. Kakashi waited patiently for Naruto to gather himself. Naruto finally managed, I'd rather have old man Hokage look at it, if that's okay. Naruto murmured looking at the floor and scuffing it with his toe. The silver-haired Jonin's singular eye widened in realization before softening. Naruto was clearly still embarrassed by the seal. Perhaps he was worried that Kakashi would care about the fox. He could never judge Naruto though, never. Minato-san was practically one of the only remaining things about his sensei Kakashi had left. Naruto was a physical, breathing symbol of his father's life and love of the village. Perhaps he should take some time and talk to Naruto about the matter one of these days. He didn't want Naruto believing Kakashi had any sort of prejudice against him. Kakashi rubbed his head, I suppose that would be alright. The relief in Naruto's eyes shone brightly. His other 2 teammates stared curiously at him, sensing the strange climate of emotions and relief, and yet not knowing what exactly caused them. That didn't dampen Naruto's mood. He'd pulled it off. He couldn't actually believe he'd done it. He wasn't worried about old man Hokage, because if anyone would believe him about this, it would be him. Alright, so Sasuke and Naruto were knocked out and I'm assuming that you stood watch over them? Kakashi asked, moving the story along. When Sakura nodded and blushed under the approving look in his eyes, Naruto giggled lightly, with a faintly similar blush on his face as well. Kakashi raised a brow when he noticed Sasuke color slightly as well, though the Uchiha heir turned his face subtly in an attempt to hide it. What was that about? The Jonin thought to himself. Something happened after Orochimaru bit Sasuke. Sakura managed finally, though with some difficulty. Oh? Kakashi asked, trying to keep his budding concern from escaping his mouth. Well, yeah, it's sort of like, we kind of like the Kunoichi's words were failing her. We think we've been feeling each other's emotions, Sasuke deadpanned from the corner. The statement took a few seconds to actually register in Kakashi's mind. You think you've been feeling each other's emotions? Kakashi asked, certain he had misheard something somewhere. It's more like sharing emotions, Sakura finally said. What do you mean? I mean, like if Naruto is getting angry for something stupid, I feel it and I get angry too. Are you certain of that? They weren't lying. Well, they didn't think they were lying at any rate. Unfortunately. Kakashi lifted his Sharingan. He hadn't noticed anything when he used it before aside from Sasuke's seal, but if he stepped back and focused more heavily on all 3 of them, I don't see anything. The 3 exhaled in relief, in simple reaction to being told that nothing was wrong. That emotion flipped into unease once more as they realized that it meant that they still had no clue what was happening and why. That must mean that the connection must be in some other form, Kakashi murmured to himself. Neither Sakura nor Naruto seemed to have anything askew with them, aside from the various scratches and bruises and weight. Sakura, what happened to your arm? The kunoichi blinked and stared down at the bandage around her forearm. I guess I got a scratch, she said unconcernedly. There was something wrong about what he was seeing. Out of all the injuries, the only one they had bothered to tie up was on Sakura's forearm. He knew for a fact none of them had any first aid supplies either, so it would have had to either been stolen or improvised. Why this injury? It appeared to be negligible, no more serious than the rest of the scratches and scrapes the trio had accumulated, so why was this the sole bandaged wound? How did that happen? Sakura's brow furrowed. I don't remember. We were fighting a lot, sensei. Okay, when did you bandage it up? I don't know. Kakashi knew the signs of a mind genjutsu when he saw one. Clearly someone had put one on Sakura. From what he could tell it was a simple, though fairly complex one, which tricked the target's brain into believing the information was harmful and thus buried it itself. None of the genin should have had the skill to do that though. Can I see the wound? He asked her, and when she flinched away slightly he knew for certain he was right. Why yeah, she replied, shaking her head to clear off whatever strange thoughts were in her head. What's wrong, Sakura-chan? Naruto asked concernedly. Her confusion was worrying. Nothing, it just doesn't feel like I should unwrap it is all, I don't know why. Ah, I'm just being silly, way too complex for a genin. He grabbed her arm lightly and quickly untied the bandage so she wouldn't have to deal with the conflicted feelings. Whoa. Naruto exclaimed, verbally announcing the shock running through everyone's minds. Wow, but this looks just like Sasuke-kun's. Indeed, there was a small circle of complex characters about the size of a small tangerine. Instead of the dark scarlet of her teammates, hers was completely black. Sasuke remained silent though his eyes were wide. What was going on? Naruto? Kakashi demanded suddenly, do you have a mark like this on your body? Huh? No, I don't think so, he scratched his cheek thoughtfully. I woulda noticed by now, don't you think, hey? Kakashi snagged Naruto's hand away from his face and pulled it before his singular eye. The Jonin had thought he'd seen ink on the tip of Naruto's finger, but instead, on the tip, was a very small version of the exact same seal. It was fairly innocuous, unlike Sakura's and Sasuke's. Said two leaned in curiously to spot the small mark. That's the same Sasuke-kun and I have. What does this mean? Naruto asked, pulling his hand away. Kakashi wished he knew. I don't care about that, Sasuke snapped, can you undo it? The Jonin rubbed his head thoughtfully, feeling more out of his depth than he had in a long time. Since he'd been around these three though, he found himself feeling this way more and more often. He had no clue exactly how he felt about that particular detail. Right now? No. Kakashi admitted. What? Sasuke hissed viciously through his teeth, we can't stay like this. I'm sorry, but I can't even attempt to undo it until I know more about it and what consequences releasing it might have. Sasuke was practically vibrating with pent-up anger. Glancing up, Kakashi noted that his two other genin were also visibly angry, though they looked marginally more uncomfortable with the fierce and violent emotion. Sakura in particular looked as though she might be sick. Kakashi wagered she'd never felt such strong emotion in her entire life. Orochimaru is behind this, and no matter what he has done, be assured it is with malicious intent. He made sure to make eye contact with each of them to strike how serious the matter was. Naruto and Sakura both shivered under his intense gaze, but Sasuke remained firm. Kakashi didn't want to give his students nightmares, but if he couldn't impress upon the Uchiha heir exactly how important it was, one thing he best known for is his love of experiments. They have unearthed his labs before, and what they found was not pretty. Tampering with his work is extremely dangerous. Now Sakura looked as though she might cry, and Naruto looked queasy. Sasuke's eyes eventually faltered and fell to the ground unhappily. Kakashi sighed. Even after that, I'm not skilled enough to even attempt to try and remove such a complex seal, Kakashi said, I'd have to get a seal master to take a look. Seal master? Naruto asked with a wrinkled brow. What's a seal master, sensei? Sakura inquired. Well, they're seal specialists. All three were looking unsatisfied by the answer, but he wasn't particularly inclined to give a further explanation. Not now, there was too much to do. At the very least he knew he needed to report the matter to the Hokage immediately. Further action would just have to wait. Other than the communal emotions, have there been any other side effects? The Jonin asked. Sakura shook her head to reply. Well, then I'm afraid you'll all just have to stay with it for a little while. Kakashi spoke with a nonchalance he didn't really feel at the moment. What? What else can we do? Kakashi raised a brow. The best you can try is to work on better controlling your emotions. From the glares he received, Kakashi inferred that none of his students were very happy with that. You have a few hours until the end of the round, why don't you use that time to rest? Kakashi suggested. There should be a room at the top of the stairs. Sakura nodded, still looking miserable. Kakashi sighed silently before throwing on an eye smile. I'll see you after the second exam officially ends. Congratulations on passing. Jana. And with a poof of smoke, Konoha Genin were left in the large and hollow room. Naruto, Sasuke and Sakura exchanged weary glances, ambivalent feelings hung thickly in the air between them. Silently they moved up the stairs. At the top they discovered a medium-sized room with a few futons folded up in the corner. The walls were bland blue, and the floors were old-style tatami. If Sasuke had to guess, he would say that every team's designated space had one of these equipped. Having a communal area would only tempt and encourage cheating and underhanded tactics to reduce the competition. Sasuke moved close to the walls as Sakura and Naruto looked around the room. Tapping lightly, he found his theory confirmed. There wasn't a sound. Clearly the rooms had been protected by some kind of sealer ninjutsu. Hey, there's some food here. Naruto announced ecstatically, waving around the generic rations. Stop staring at the wall and eat something. You're so annoying, Sasuke said, too tired to get properly irritated. The three gathered around the small table in the center and passed about the tasteless rations. Though the rations were as tasteless as they expected, at the bottom of the bowl, they found several pieces of fruit. They quickly divvied them amongst themselves. Silence reigned long after the three finished eating. None of them knew what to say to each other. They had been forced to share things with each other that none of them really wanted to. It was an emotionally draining day, and the fact that their new situation would not be a quick fix laid heavy on their minds. Not only had that, but the third exam still lay ahead of them. Despite the fact they were closer than ever to each other, none knew what to say. Sasuke stewed darkly in his mind. It seemed as though this wasn't going to go away anytime soon, and he would have to put up with his weak teammates' emotions dragging him down. Until he honed a way of overcoming his teammates, he would have to find a way to deal with them. Sasuke cleared his throat, making both Sakura and Naruto turn towards him. I think we need to create some kind of reaction plan. What do you mean? Naruto asked. I mean how we tell someone to cut it out if the emotion is too much. Sasuke was thinking back to the forest when Sakura's fear and panic had nearly exposed them. It was easy not to notice what emotions any of them felt personally, so finding a method of alerting said person if it was too intense was a very good idea. Oh. So that the other teams won't know what we're talking about, Sakura realized. Exactly. The Uchiha nodded. Like a password then? Sakura suggested. It has to be something generic enough that we can apply it no matter what the situation is, but it has to be specific enough that Naruto will remember it. Hey. Naruto's temper flared in indignation. A tic developed in Sasuke's brow, but he was pleased to note that his annoyance was stronger than Naruto's anger as the heated emotion faded away. Naruto, did you sharpen your kunai? Sasuke asked sharply instead. I did the day before the first exam. Naruto said, his tone laced with confusion. That one is clearly too generic. Sasuke sighed. Naruto crossed his arms. Humph. How about, are you hungry? Sakura put forth. I don't think we could say that casually in a mission. Sasuke shook his head. Your headband looks a little loose. She tried again. What if we aren't wearing a headband, Sakura? Oh, you're right, Sasuke-kun. She said with a sigh before a slightly mean grin came over her face. How about, Naruto, will you go on a date with me? There's no way I'd actually say that in real life. A flash of hurt shot through the bond, but before Sasuke or Sakura had time to say anything, it was covered up by a pervasive sadness and Naruto's sheepish laugh. You're so mean, Sakura-chan. He said lightly. Sakura was too taken aback to form her usual angry reply. Are you guys okay? The orange-clad ninja asked. Sasuke paused. That might work, he spoke aloud. What? Why would Naruto, will you go on a date with me be something we would ever say in a mission? Naruto asked bewildered and affronted, and you'd have to say it too, team. Bleh. Not that, Sasuke said irritably, are you okay? That might work. Sakura spoke slowly. It might even help us calm down a little. Naruto thought about it as well, a bit pleased it was his phrase that they had decided on. Right. We'll use this for the moment until we can think of something better, Sasuke decided, hopefully, it will wear off before that though. The three of them exchanged ambivalent looks. None were overly hopeful. I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to sleep, Naruto said, treading over towards the folded futons and laying one out on the floor. As he got his bed ready, his thoughts centered around his father. Maybe he would know something about what was going on. His head had barely hit the pillow when the taxing and tumultuous occurrences of the past day and a half finally sunk in, and he drifted off into some well-earned rest. This time when Naruto found himself standing in the sherbet room, his eyes were immediately searching out his father. Said man was lying down and staring at the non-ceiling. He seemed instinctively to know that Naruto was there, because the moment Naruto's eyes landed on his figure, his father jumped up with a somewhat anxious energy. Whatever he had to say had to wait. Naruto's problem was more important. Naruto. His father exclaimed, quickly coming over. Something weird's happening. Naruto exclaimed. His father's shoulders fell. So something did happen. He figured something probably occurred, but he hadn't been able to catch glimpses of the outside world like he normally could. Perhaps it had to do with the redirection of chakra. He needed to contemplate the matter later, when things weren't quite as pressing. Yeah. We're all sharing emotions and we can't stop it, and Sakura totally gets all blushy around Sasuke and I don't wait, do you know what's going on? Naruto demanded as the full meaning of his father's last sentence stuck in. The fourth wearily rubbed his forehead. I suspected something might happen, though I really had hoped it wouldn't. What happened? Was it that bastard snake freak? Naruto asked seriously. A small grin cracked over Minato's face. He knew he should be upset at the swearing, that was what parents did, right? But hearing Naruto bluntly title one of the strongest ninja and the word a bastard snake freak made him feel a bit better. No, it wasn't Orochimaru, at least, not directly. What do you mean? Whose fault is it then? Well, Minato scratched his head sheepishly, it's mine. You, Naruto exclaimed. Why would you want me to feel their emotions? I didn't. Really. It was a complete fluke. I tried to cover Sasuke's seal, and I hadn't ever attempted a seal like that before, so I ad-libbed a lit. What? Naruto shouted once more. Naruto, Minato said, placing a calming hand on his son's shoulder. If you wait for me to finish, I'll probably answer the questions you have. The Jinchuriki looked a little sullen and embarrassed, but nodded to show he understood. Alright then, Minato began, after you and your team fought Orochimaru and he altered your chakra flow, I gained enough strength to take possession of your body for a little time. His son's eyes widened dramatically, and he opened his mouth before Minato held a finger up, reminding him to wait. It wasn't on purpose, honestly. However, it was fortunate I was in control because Orochimaru had done something truly terrible to your teammate. Minato spoke seriously, you know he was bitten, yes. Well, the bite wasn't normal, it was a bite infused with dark chakra. I don't know for certain what the mark did, but I've thought about it and I'm pretty sure Orochimaru was trying to get Sasuke to become one of his followers. The chakra was potent and would connect Sasuke to Orochimaru. Like brainwash him, Naruto blurted, his face white. Minato said nothing about the interruption, he only nodded. Not exactly, but that's close enough. The user would likely to crave power beyond the norm, more specifically, the dark twisted power Orochimaru possesses. Thus, they would be driven to seek out Orochimaru. Minato shook his head. He took on a student in the past, and the mark left deep scars on them, neither Jiraiya nor I were able to undo it. Minato trailed off and shook his head. Let's just say that Orochimaru's interest in your teammate is considerably bad. Naruto didn't know who Jiraiya was, but didn't care enough at the moment. But why Sasuke? He asked instead. If I had to guess, I would say it has to do with the Sharingan. Minato said as he rubbed his chin, the blood trait your teammate possesses is a strong one indeed. I imagine Orochimaru wishes to have that in his service. Naruto looked faint. This is all speculation on my part though, Minato said in a much lighter tone. It may be some time until we can know for sure what drove Orochimaru. You stopped it though, right? Naruto asked, desperation in his eyes. Minato was able to smile, I believe so. His son let out a large sigh of relief. Thank goodness. Yes, but at a cost, the older blonde said, though I understand the general idea of the chakra flow and purpose, I've never seen anything like that before. I needed to act quickly, so I used a blood seal usually meant for controlling and filtering unstable chakra. It was the best I could do on short notice. There was an apologetic note in his voice, but the look on Naruto's face was understanding. I needed blood and chakra of two different types to counteract the dark chakra, so I used your friend Sakura's and yours. Wait, then why doesn't she remember what happened? Was she sleeping? Not exactly, Minato said sheepishly. Oh. You did something to her head, huh? Naruto realized. Just a mild genjutsu, no permanent damage done, Minato assured, though the connection between the seal and you and your friend's emotions still escapes me. So you don't know how to undo it? Minato looked guilty, I'm afraid not. Anxiety built in his stomach. I understand if you're upset with me, I didn't realize there would be such drastic consequences. But Sasuke will be okay, because of this. Minato hesitated a moment before nodding. He should be as long as no one messes with the seal. Then I guess we'll just have to learn to live with it. Naruto said decisively. His father's expression turned gentle. He would never know how he came to have such a kind and forgiving child. Lord knew he didn't deserve it. He noticed a troubled look grow over Naruto's face. What is it? But what if someone tries to remove the seal and that snake guy's chakra gets out? Naruto asked. Minato shook his head, I doubt anyone would mess with a seal they don't recognize. It's too dangerous. No one knows about this except Kushina and he. It was a secret of the Uzumaki clan. Except a select few, who are no longer around. Naruto looked a little better about it. Do you know how we can deal with all this emotional stuff? Naruto asked. Minato gave him a sympathetic smile. The best thing would be to keep the emotions positive. Negative emotions only lead to more negative emotions. Naruto nodded, though he still looked a bit dismayed that Minato didn't have an answer. So, how did the rest of the Chunin exam go? Minato asked, shaking Naruto out of his funk. I almost forgot to tell you. Naruto exclaimed. We totally got the jump on this team from Iowa. Naruto quickly went into a descriptive story about their confrontation with the foreign nin, with all the overdramatic exaggeration Minato expected from a boy his age. When Minato admitted that since the new seal had been placed, he hadn't been able to catch wisps of his son's life like he could before, Naruto took it as an invitation to tell him every single detail. He talked about his various classmates and their abilities and what he thought about all of them. Minato smiled as his son spoke, enjoying his energetic explanations. Upon realizing that Minato knew very little about the first stage of the exam, Naruto delightedly informed him about Ibiki's psychological test. He proudly told his father about how he had stood up to Ibiki. Minato smiled and ruffled his hair, making Naruto's grin widen even further. Having someone listen attentively and actually care about what he was talking about made his whole body feel warm and fluttery. When he finished his story about how Kabuto had given them the scroll, he stopped as a thought hit him. Do you know what the third exam will be? Naruto asked, feeling apprehensive about the coming events. Minato paused. Would he be giving Naruto a hand up by telling him about the third round? He didn't think so. It was the same every year. If Naruto bothered to look it up, he probably would find it. Well, Naruto, if I remember correctly, the third round is usually single-person combat between the remaining candidates. And I have to beat them all. Naruto gulped, his abundant overconfidence slipping. No, not exactly. The fights are evaluated based on the ninja's skill. If a shinobi shows superior skill and innovative thinking but still loses, there is a good chance that the shinobi will be awarded the title of Chunin anyways. The relieved look on his son's face made Minato smile. Though winning doesn't hurt your chances. The yondaime winked. Did you win yours, Dad? Naruto asked, obviously expecting Minato to tell him the story of his conquest over the Chunin exams. Minato shook his head instead. The Chunin exams weren't held when I was your age. Huh? The other blonde uttered in confusion. Konoha village was embroiled in the Second Great Ninja War at the time, and things like the Chunin exams were suspended. So how did you make Chunin then? Naruto asked. Promotions were given on the battlefield, Minato said, his mind drifting back to the dangerous time. Every step towards the enemy lines were laden with hidden explosives and traps, arrows and lightning jutsu rained from above, and Jinjutsu captured unlucky souls into a permanent sleep. He sighed. Thankfully, things aren't like that anymore. A small tired smile covered his face. Naruto was looking at his father with amazement, which slightly softened the blow of the violent past. Will you tell me about it? Naruto asked hesitantly. Maybe when you're older. He smiled at his son's disgruntled expression. Naruto didn't need to about such things this early on. Things like that would simply be a distraction which he couldn't afford, being knee-deep in the Chunin exams. He needed to be in top form. Speaking of, Naruto, do you feel well rested when you wake up? Minato asked. What do you mean? I mean after you come here, do you still feel tired after you wake up? Naruto blinked. I never thought about it before. He folded his arms in deep thought. Minato waited patiently. I don't think so, Naruto said eventually. I feel like I slept fine. I haven't really slept tons recently. Minato exhaled, He was uncertain if the increased brain activity while Naruto was asleep would reduce the rest his body received. For now it appeared things were fine, though it was something to keep an eye on. So, Dad, Naruto began, an excited imploring look in his eyes, what are you going to teach me today? Ma Naruto, Minato said, putting up his hands, I don't know if now is the time. Naruto's expression fell and became slightly mutinous. Minato stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder, making his son look up. I'm not going back on my word Naruto, the yondaime assured, I just don't want to teach you something new right before the competition. Your mind should be clear when you enter a battle. If you're busy trying to remember something you haven't perfected yet, well, it's a distraction you don't need and would hurt you more than help. Naruto nodded slowly, accepting the answer. I'm sure you'll do fine, Naruto, Minato said smiling, you have the most uncanny way of surprising people. His son brightened up at that. I suppose I could give you a few tips for going up against an enemy though, Minato amended, figuring a few basic guidelines wouldn't hurt. As you've been going against many foreign nin lately, there are several important things to keep in mind when you're being confronted by an enemy shinobi. Naruto lowered himself to the floor and watched his father attentively. The fourth raised a finger, the first is that they will use jutsu you probably have never seen before. Naruto nodded, remembering the sound, grass, and rock nin he'd seen attack in the exam, and Haku and Zabuza. How do you know what to do? The genin asked. Well, that brings me to my second point and one of the central pillars of the shinobi way. Minato held up a second finger. You need to keep in mind that intelligence gathering is vital. Naruto's expression twisted. He had heard many lectures on the subject back at the academy, but none of that seemed very important at the time. Figuring out what jutsu your opponent uses can give you a huge leg up in the battle, especially if they don't know yours, Minato said. He'd lost that edge a long time ago around halfway through the second ninja war. He mourned the loss of advantage. Anyways, the best way to do so is to either watch your enemy before you attack or to look them up in the bingo book. Eh? The blonde teenager made another face. Obviously these aren't always a viable choice, especially not in this competition. Minato said. So what do I do? Naruto asked. Well, gathering information during the battle is harder, but often the most informative. Minato continued, one way of doing so is to keep on the defensive and let your opponent reveal his attacks. Naruto frowned, making Minato laugh. I know that isn't really your style though, Minato smiled, which is why I'm going to reveal to you a secret about the Kage Bushin Jutsu. Naruto's eyes widened. If you send your clone to fight an enemy while you are hidden away and the clone pops, all the memories of the clone will be yours. Naruto grinned widely, we figured that out today. He exclaimed. Huh? Minato scratched his head. That surprised him. As far as he knew, Naruto never figured it out until this point. He wondered if Sasuke and Sakura played a part in the discovery. I didn't really think about using it that way though, Naruto admitted, rubbing the back of his head. Intelligence gathering is one of the more underrated skills in the shinobi world. Many young ninja, and even some older ones, believe its only use is for invading an enemy village and gathering the secrets, but its applicability is much wider. You can find out all about your enemy without even having to put yourself in danger. Though it's true that very few ninja have mastered the Kage Bushin the way you have, Minato admitted. That's awesome. Naruto uttered. His expression grew excited, and Minato knew that Naruto was just itching to try it. That's just something to keep in mind, Minato said with a small shrug. Thanks Dad. Naruto said enthusiastically. Minato smiled widely. He didn't think the amazement and happiness of hearing Naruto call him dad would ever fade. I'm totally going to beat the crap out of everyone. Naruto fused. Minato opened his mouth to reply, but the invisible floor began to shake and tremble. This time though, small smiles slowly grew over their faces into excited grins. Good luck Naruto, Minato said giving his son a shoulder hug. I know you'll do great. Thanks. Naruto shouted. The next thing Naruto knew, he was being shaken awake by Sakura. Wake up Naruto, the Kunoichi spoke impatiently. Naruto quickly sat up and rubbed his eyes blearily as he stared at the bland room. Hamando, Sasuke said curtly, leaning on the doorframe, the next part of the exam is about to start. Right, just give me a second, he said, and the other two stepped into the hallway. Naruto scrambled out of bed. None of them had anything to change into so they had all slept in their clothes, despite how much their clothes already smelled. Because of that, Naruto only had to find his jacket and sandals. A few moments later, he was out the door. Sasuke and Sakura were standing there waiting for him. With silent nods, they departed down the stairs to the circular room they first entered through. Geez, don't they have anything to eat? Naruto grumbled, I'm starving. There were a few pieces of fruit we got, but you were sleeping. Sakura tightened her hit I ate. Sakura-chan. That's so mean. Just eat a ration bar, Sakura said dismissively, if you hadn't slept in so much, you could have had some fruit. But Sakura-chan, shut up, both of you. Sasuke hissed, this isn't the time. The Kunoichi's expression immediately dropped in embarrassment, feeling her crush's displeasure. Naruto on the other hand, screwed his face up irritably, but pulled out his last ration bar and quickly shoved it into his mouth. The mutinous air between the two boys was thick and tense. It was only when they reached the bottom of the stairs that they noticed a door they had previously overlooked. A brown-haired leaf nin stood by it, and the trio walked over. The rest of the teams are on the other side of the door, he informed them shortly, the minute you enter the doors, the exam resumes. Naruto and Sakura swallowed. Sasuke was the one to push the door open. All of them tensed expecting the worst, but instead of a sudden attack, all they saw were the other competitors getting into rows. The trio quickly followed the example, coming in near the middle. The Hokage himself was watching the proceedings from the front of the room. Two ninja flanked him, and behind them two Anbis hovered on the side. One of the ninja beside him was Anko, and the other was a brown-haired ninja wearing a bandana. Sasuke was surprised by the amount of competitors still left in the exam. Though Anko had threatened to get rid of more than half of them, there was still a pretty large sum left. He noticed that all of the rookie 9 and guys team had made it into the third round. Sasuke estimated that there were about 26 or 27 people left. Some looked like they were in considerably better shape than others. When he looked at the clock, he realized that the second exam had just ended about 20 minutes ago. That meant that though he, Naruto, and Sakura had gotten there with about 7 hours left, other teams were just getting there now. A smirk spread over the Uchiha's lips as he realized that they had a considerable edge. Something he was looking forward to exploiting in whatever the exam brought next. With that in mind, he carefully took note of who the remaining examinees. After the entire group had assembled, the Hokage cleared his throat. Congratulations on passing the second stage of the exam. His eyes scanned the congregation that had gathered before him. However, your real test begins here. No longer are you within your teams. Now, this is an individual test. You will be forced to fight one-on-one against foreign nin and genin from your own village and team. Reactions of outrage and surprise echoed quietly through the group. Naruto was glad he had known beforehand. He'd had a little time to come to grips with fighting a nin from his same village. Though the idea of fighting his teammates was something he was having a hard time reconciling. What if he got Sakura-cha? He didn't think he could hurt her. Speaking of, beside him he felt the pink-haired girl vibrating with fear. Sasuke smothered it with a wave of irritation, much to Naruto's relief. Truthfully, her nervousness was really messing with Naruto's mind and confidence. From our own team? A male Sunanin asked, sounding apprehensive. Precisely. Your enemy is on all sides. That doesn't seem very realistic, someone from the front row muttered. Old age had not affected Sarutobi's hearing in the slightest, and he raised an eyebrow before replying. Does anyone know why we hold the Chunin exams instead of doing on-field promotions in combat situations? Or? Naruto turned around to see who had unobtrusively spoken the word. To his surprise, it was the weird quiet kid with the sunglasses who always sat in the back of the class at the academy. The Hokage nodded. Exactly. We are in times of peace as of now. Konoha has treaties with each of your villages. This is an opportunity for the villages to show strength and valor in a mock war scenario in order to prevent the need for further conflicts. He paused. But there is another reason, the Sandaime said seriously. The Chunin exams are one of the rare opportunities you as ninja have to go against your teammates and fellow village members in a truly substantial way. The exam tests your fortitude and forces you to make difficult choices. Later on in your careers, you may have to make decisions between your and your teammates' futures and choose one or the other. This is a close substitute. That's not to say that it is certain you will go against a teammate, Sarutobi said, a tad lighter. The drawing for pairings is completely random. The proctor for the exam is Gekko Hade. I leave the rest of the instructions to him. A sickly-looking ninja from his side stepped forward. At this time, would those who wish to quit please raise their hand? After that we will commence the next round, the brown-haired ninja Gekko said, coughing slightly. Your teammates will not be disqualified by your choice. From here on out, it's a single-person competition. Lances were exchanged throughout the room between teammates. Everyone looking for the first person to crack. Of the group gathered, Kabuto was the one to finally raise his hand. I'd like to leave, I don't think I can go on, he said in a weak but earnest tone. Naruto felt mild upset. Kabuto had helped them a lot the last exam, and it was only because of him they even passed it. When they fought their way to the tower, he had seemed strong enough. Besides that, it shouldn't have taken 7 hours to reunite with his teammates, so he should have been able to rest. Naruto didn't like to see a person like Kabuto give up on their goals. Why? He asked Kabuto as he passed by Team 7 on his way out. Sorry Naruto, he replied with a smile, my head's just not in it. Naruto sighed and crossed his arms unhappily. Stay focused, dope, Sasuke said indifferently. The blonde shinobi shot him a glare but turned back to the front. After Kabuto, a handful of people raised their hands and also left. After a few more moments of waiting in which no one else raised their hands, the ninja from before spoke again. If there is no one else, then we will continue. As there are too many remaining competitors, there will be a preliminary before the final third round, which will take place at a later date. Exclamations of shock sounded through the large room. Sakura flared with a mix of anger and distress that quickly spread through the bond. Sakura-chan, are you okay? Naruto asked, barely remembering the code they set yesterday amidst her swirling anxiety. Why yes, she said, willing herself to calm down, I'm fine. Sasuke choked out a relieved breath. Her constantly shifting emotions were beginning to really irritate him. His eyes narrowed though as he considered the last trick. If enough people had left because they felt too weak, then the remaining group would have had a waiting period before they even fought again. Those that doubted themselves that much had weak drive and clearly did not deserve to be Chunin. Sakura, he couldn't help feel, was their ilk. At least it was no longer a team competition, so she wouldn't be dragging him down anymore. The first round will be announced shortly. Will the competitors now go to the second level? The proctoring ninja requested. Naruto was at the forefront of the trio as they headed up the right staircase, all turning over the sudden event in their minds. Sasuke in particular was scoping out the competition as the majority of the foreign nin climbed the stairs opposite of them. Though he knew Naruto was ambivalent on the matter and Sakura was just plain anxious, he was excited. That feeling grew stronger and stronger until it cleaned out the rest of the bond. At least he was beginning to get the hang of it. Kakashi-sensei. Sakura exclaimed happily when she saw the gray-haired Jonin leaning against the iron bars of the porch, Icha Paradise firmly in hand. Yo, the gray-haired nin greeted. His greeting was completely overrun because a Jonin burst forward, nearly trampling Team 7 as he did. They dodged out of the way as he ran to Tenten, Niji, and Lee who were walking up behind them. Youthful students. Your burning flames beat the dark forest of death and now you stand on the precipice of victory. He proclaimed. The Hyuga was looking away with an expression of distaste on his face and the female of the group was smiling awkwardly. Rock Lee on the other hand was returning his sensei's gestures with equal vigor. Kakashi-sensei, Naruto asked eventually as he watched the ongoing spectacle, who is that? That, he said, flipping a page of his book, is Mito Guy, a Jonin Taijutsu specialist. We met him before Naruto. Sakura reminded him. Oh yeah. He was the turtle sensei. Kakashi didn't bother asking what Naruto meant. He didn't want to know. Is he always like this? Sasuke asked with a look of disgust. They'd already seen their odd display after his brief battle with Rock Lee, but Sasuke hadn't actually believed anyone could behave so ridiculously all the time. It just made it harder to stomach that someone so ludicrous could be so powerful. At least he wasn't on their team though. Compared to Guy and Lee, Sakura and Naruto were tame. Yes. Kakashi answered with one word. He briefly turned away from his book to rummage through his various pockets. Here, he said, tossing light lavender elbow covers to Sakura and black gloves to Naruto. Huh? Naruto asked. What are these for, sensei? Sakura asked. To hide your latest tattoos, he said with a light-eye smile. The two of them glanced at each other. Do we have to? Naruto asked, his voice whiny. Kakashi stared at the orange-wearing teen until he was suitably uncomfortable. The blonde quickly pulled the gloves on, thankful to see that they were combat gloves with velcro straps. Sakura hesitantly followed his lead and slid the elbow pads up her arm until they covered her seal. They felt weird and Naruto in particular was trying to get used to the slight restriction of his mobility. He wondered if they had any in orange. Oh, and don't think you're getting out of this, Sasuke, Kakashi said mildly, when this exam is over, we'll have to do something about your wardrobe of high-neck shirts. Anger flared over the bond, which both Naruto and Sakura echoed as they realized this would be a permanent matter until further notice. Seeing the mutinous expressions, Kakashi again leveled them with a serious gaze until one by one they folded. Sasuke took a whole 3 minutes of not blinking, but eventually turned to the side with a tch. Let's move a little away. Kakashi glanced to the side, seeing his overenthusiastic rival. Team 7 moved further down the walkway away from the lurid Team Guy and closer to where Team 10 was standing. Asuma nodded in greeting to his fellow Jonin, and Shikamaru and Choji slowly meandered their direction. In complete contrast, Ino practically skipped over. Ino pig, Sakura said with a scoff, didn't expect to see you here. I knew you'd be here, Ino replied, just as cattily, only because Sasuke-kun's on your team to carry your big useless forehead out of the forest. She laughed. Hurt sparked around Sakura at just how close Ino was to how Sakura genuinely felt. I knew you'd do well Sasuke-kun, Ino oozed. Sasuke felt immediate disgust at the proceeding. Caught between the two feelings of hurt and repulsion as they battled for the top spot made Naruto's head spin. Hey Naruto, Shikamaru said casually as he and Choji approached. Hey Shikamaru. He greeted, a little dazedly. I'm glad you made it out of the forest. I'm not, he said bluntly, I mean, as if this whole exam wasn't troublesome enough, they had to go and add another round. It's not worth it. Don't talk like that Shikamaru. Ino demanded, breaking from her verbal sparring with Sakura. Naruto sighed, glad for the reprieve of emotion as Sakura and Sasuke gathered themselves once more. It was hard to interject when they were both flooding him with unwelcome feelings. He needed to work on using their code more often so he wouldn't be as unprepared or as nauseous. I guess we're all here again, Kiba said with a toothy smirk as teammate walked over, passing Team Guy with a healthy berth. It seems so, Shino said mutedly. It's good to see you Naruto, Hinata stuttered. Huh? Oh, you too, he said offhandedly. Their face burst into red. Pay attention, the leader of Team 10 commented, they're beginning the matchups. In the very front of the room, above two large stone hands and a hand sign, there was a giant monitor. Characters filled the screen, and after a few moments it showed the first match. Ibumi Zaku vs Rock Lee. Yosh. Lee's fist shot into the air with excitement as he realized he was the first competitor. His opponent being a sound ninja didn't faze him in the slightest. I am first. My youth will guide me into a most righteous victory. The other genin winced at the loudness. Sasuke wondered when the team had scooted closer to them. Unfortunately, they had run out of space to retreat, being too close to the wall opposite the stairs. Inwardly he groaned, the way things were going, this was going to be a very long preliminaries. That's right Lee, Guy said with his trademark smile, set an example for the rest. Show them what the power of youth can do. Yes sir. Now go get them Tiger. Yes sir. Kakashi sweat dropped as he watched from down the rail, you know Guy, we can all hear you even if you speak at a normal level. What do you mean? Guy demanded, I am not yelling. This is my normal level. Is it too youthful for you? Right, Kakashi said with a sigh before turning back to his book. How terribly cool of you, Kakashi, Guy grinned, not that I expected anything less from my eternal rival. Did you say something? The gray-haired Jounin asked as he turned the page. Eternal rival? Naruto asked with a curious expression. This was the second time Guy mentioned it and Naruto didn't understand in the slightest. A wide smile spread over Guy's face, but before he could reply, a coughing sound broke through their conversation. Jekohei coughed for a few more seconds before he raised his hand. He stood in between the Sound Nin and the eager-looking Rock Lee. The first match has been decided. The match will continue until one opponent forfeits, is knocked out or is unable to continue fighting. Killing is not allowed. Outside interference will lead to disqualification, the proctor said. Come on Lee, show this guy who's boss. Tenten shouted from the stands. Fight with all the power of youth. Guy exclaimed. Lee sent his sensei a thumbs up and a sparkling smile. Several of the other genin averted their eyes at the blinding white light from his teeth. Everything about Guy and Rock Lee was entirely too much, Sakura couldn't help but think. Across from Lee, one of the sound shinobi from earlier that day, stared him down forward cockily. Sakura had thought she recognized his name. Deko looked between the two ninja. The match between Rock Lee of Konoha and Abumi Zaku of the Sound will now commence. He pulled his hand down, showing the start of the round before backing away. Lee assumed his basic fighting stance with a confident expression on his face. Come at me if you dare. Zaku stood with his two palms extended towards his opponent, eyes closed, obviously ignoring Lee's words. Konoha Nin bent his knees and prepared to attack. If you will not make a move, then I will. The cloud of dust and a loud boom followed Zaku's attack. The Sound Ninja lay in wait outside of the cloud, eyes darting to wherever the green-wearing ninja would emerge. Lee. Tenten cried. The green blur darted out from the dust and towards the Sound Nin with startling velocity. Fast. Sakura uttered in surprise. What they'd seen before the exam hardly compared to what they were seeing now. Sasuke grit his teeth, realizing that the green-wearing shinobi hadn't gone all out. His feet were nearly a blur as he moved, much to the genin's communal amazement. Though his chakra supply wasn't at its best, Sasuke decided to activate his Sharingan. This was a fight he didn't want to miss a second of. How come he's so fast? Sakura asked. Lee trains with weights, working every day to improve his youthful ability, Guy answered grinning. Cool, Naruto exhaled. He frowned as he squinted, trying to understand what the Sound Nin was doing. The foreign shinobi would hold out his hands and bursts of something came out. They didn't look like anything. His ears kind of hurt though. He saw Kiba and Akamaru were wincing too. What's that guy doing? Naruto asked his sensei. Lee's opponent is a sound shinobi. Their specialty is exactly what you'd think it is, sound attacks. Naruto nodded, still not fully grasping how that equated to what he was seeing. He's compressing the sound with chakra and then channeling it. I would guess that he'd using small holes in his palms, Kakashi observed. You, Sakura uttered, looking at her own hands. Sasuke, mind your chakra, Kakashi reminded the Uchiha who had become caught up in the match, you don't know who you might go up against. Sasuke's eyes immediately flickered to the red-haired sand ninja and with a small nod, he dismissed the Dijutsu. Sensei, Tenten began, glancing at Sasuke with a sandal tone, that's the blood trait that allows him to copy any technique, isn't it? Are you sure it was okay for him to watch? Her sensei smiled and gave her a grin. Tenten, there isn't a worry in my mind about the Uchiha watching, Guy spoke confidently. Even if he sees every step and memorizes it, his body couldn't handle the strain of executing it. Sasuke shot a glare towards Guy's direction, anger pouring off of him. Sakura and Naruto both started slightly at the sudden outpour. Sensei. It's the lotus. Tenten gasped, cutting off Sasuke's anger. Rock Lee lay a combo of kicks towards the other nin's stomach, pounding him up in the air, despite the natural pull of gravity. Zaku was helpless to fight it as Lee began expertly binding him with bandages mid-flight. Whoa. Naruto exclaimed. You didn't, Kakashi said wearily. I did Kakashi, the other Jonin replied without a hint of guilt. Huh? Naruto uttered, looking between the two instructors. The lotus is a powerful technique that floods a person's body with chakra to a nearly unhealthy point. It grants to user incredible strength and power, but at the cost of sometimes permanent damage if it is used to a certain extent. Kakashi said with a serious expression on his face as Lee's body began to fall back towards the earth, Zaku firmly in grasp. That Sakura trailed off, at a loss. When Rock Lee got his opponent early, she knew that she had lucked out not having to fight him, but now she knew how impossibly blessed she had been. Zaku came down to the floor with a harsh crashing sound. Rock Lee stepped to the side, unwinding himself up from his enemy who flopped to the floor uselessly. Suddenly a hand stirred and grabbed Lee by the leg warmers and pulled him to the floor. Ah! Lee exclaimed, his head whipping to the destroyed floor where Zaku was slowly trying to stand. With a reflexive kick that sent the sound shinobi flying into the concrete wall, Zaku was completely down for the count. Lee stood in a weak fighting stance, swaying lightly as he stared in the direction of the unconscious body, as though waiting for it to stand up again. The winner is Rock Lee from Konohagakure. Gekko announced with a cough. How could that guy even stand after what Lee did to him? Sakura wondered, her voice full of awe. How could he even be alive? Ino exclaimed. Lee could easily have lost this fight, Kakashi said, making all the rookie 9 genin stare at him gobsmacked. You saw it too then? Guy asked, looking a little tired. Kakashi nodded. Before they hit the ground, the sound shinobi used his hand cannons and shot the ground, softening to blow considerably. If it wasn't stone, he probably would have been able to attack. As it was, stone is too dense for sound to break apart sufficiently, so he was hurt rather badly. If this had taken place outside, he probably would have been able to continue, and Lee would be at a considerable disadvantage. His eyes turned to Rock Lee. Everyone's gaze followed and saw how suddenly exhausted and hurt he looked. The medic shinobi were fluttering around him concernedly. After using the lotus, a person's body needs a lot of recovery time. Kakashi sighed. I'll speak to him about this later, Gain said seriously, but for now, my youthful student has triumphed. He shouted, regaining his passion. I did it, Guy-sensei. Lee exclaimed as he came back up to the balcony. The smile on his face erased all the weariness that had previously been there. Lee. Guy shouted in delight as he began running towards his student. Guy-sensei. Lee shouted in reply. Lee. Guy-sensei. Lee. Kakashi covered Naruto, Sasuke and Sakura's eyes with his hands and book. It's best not to watch, he said simply. Ugh, Sakura shuddered as she heard the crashing of waves and the sunset. I think it's kind of sweet. Naruto said, a small warmness filtering through the bond. What? Sakura asked in shock. Sasuke's emotion mirrored hers, making Naruto squirm a little. What? It kind of is. They have the matching hair and spandex, you know, it's kind of sweet. Naruto, if I ever see you in spandex, you're going straight back to the academy, Kakashi said simply as he pulled his hands away and buried his nose in his book. What? Naruto jumped. You wouldn't really do that, right sensei? The actual concern coming from Naruto made Sakura roll her eyes. Of course he wouldn't. I probably would though. TCH, you're so temperamental, dope. Naruto snapped his head towards his teammate. Team, shut up, Naruto, they're posting the next match. Ino snapped. All of their eyes flipped towards the screen. A mixture of anxiety, excitement and eagerness swirled around the trio from Team 7. When the shifting characters on the screen finally settled, that adrenaline was replaced by 1 part relief and 2 parts impatience. The second round will be Nara Shikamaru of Konoha and Tsuchi-kin from the sound. Ugh, this is such a drag, Shikamaru groaned. I can't follow that last match. That, are you saying Shikamaru go out there and kick some ass? Ino shouted. So troublesome nonetheless, the shadow jutsu user slowly went down the stairs to the center of the room where the proctor and his opponent were waiting. The other ninja had long, dark hair, held away from her face by her Sound Village headband. There was an impatient look on her face as Shikamaru lazily approached. Now that both competitors are here, the match can begin, Gekko said, coughing as he moved out of the center. The girl immediately jumped back, scanning her competition. Another sound nin, Shikamaru murmured lightly to himself. Whereas his posture was slumped and lazy, his mind was active and alert. Already he was turning over the knowledge he'd seen in the last round. She would probably have some kind of sound jutsu like her teammate, but until she attacked, he wouldn't know the specifics. He doubted it would be as explosive as her teammates, as her shoulder muscles weren't developed enough to handle the strain. So what was her move then? Yes, another sound nin, she said with a haughty voice, but I can tell you I'm much stronger than my pathetic teammate. Gin began the match by throwing 2 needles to Shikamaru. Sakura's brow furrowed, that laughter sounded familiar for some reason. Her brain finally made the connection to the name and voice from earlier. She was another one of from the group who were trying to find Sasuke, Sakura said mostly to herself. Someone was trying to find you? Kakashi asked his student. Yeah, it was after that Orochimaru guy attacked us. We heard her and her teammates talking about finding Sasuke and how Orochimaru would be mad at them if they didn't, Naruto replied, his face scrunching unhappily. Kakashi's hidden eyebrow raised in surprise. The team from the sound. Coupled with a mysterious mark on Sasuke's shoulder, was it possible that they had collaborated with Orochimaru? Asuma and Kurenai all looked towards him subtly at the mention of the name. He gave an almost indiscernible shake of the head. Everything was under control for the moment. He would report the matter, subtly and immediately. They didn't find us though, so that was good. Sakura sighed in relief. Yes it was. It goes to show what capable ninja you all are becoming, Kakashi said with a light smile. Sakura blushed, setting off a chain reaction between her teammates. Sakura, calm down, Sasuke said shortly, turning his head to the side. Oh right. She said, the flush of pride turning into embarrassment. That really isn't better, Sakura-chan, Naruto said honestly. She took a few deep breaths, trying to settle her emotions. Kakashi watched the exchange with amused interest. Perhaps the Jounin thought this could be good for them. I don't think there could be a better teamwork exercise. The three of them have to work together if they want to make it through this. He glanced at the Uchiha heir from the corner of his lone eye. Sasuke especially could benefit from a little understanding. He turned his attention back to the match just in time to catch Shikamaru's clever ploy. The winner is Shikamaru Nara from Konoha. Gekko announced. Medics arrived on the scene and quickly collected the knocked-out sound ninja. Kakashi watched the proceedings with sharp eyes. Now for the third match, Gekko said. Behind him, the board cycled through the names again before settling. The third match will be Tsuguru Misumi of Konoha and Subaku no Kankuro of Suna. Kakashi closed his book and placed it in his pockets. Without a word he turned on his heels and began walking towards the medical room. "Where are you going?" Sakura asked. Kakashi gave casual shrug. "There's something I need to check up on. I'll be back before any of you go up," he assured her. Naruto and Sakura gave him somewhat hesitant nods before turning back to the center stage. Kakashi exited quietly. He headed down the medical hallway, letting his hearing guide him to his destination. Sure enough, the echoes of the attending medic nin led him to the correct location. Inside the room, there was an orderly wrapping up the head of the female sound ninja. She had yet to regain consciousness, and Kakashi watched her for a few moments. Looking around the room, he quickly found the two masked Anbu that had been assigned to guard the room and injured. He approached them casually. "Karasu, Nico," Kakashi nodded to them respectively. "I don't suppose you can tell me what the Hokage has planned for the opening ceremony for the third exam, can you?" He straightened his hit eye. "I've got a special someone who I want to take out to it, but she's not too crazy about fireworks. We don't know anything yet." Nico sighed, his posture loosening. "But don't get your hopes up, I doubt you'll have too much time on your hands, since you'll probably have at least one gen in there. I heard the Uchiha is quite strong." His tone lightened. "No, you'll be stuck there like the rest of us, doomed to merely watch the fun. I figured." Kakashi spoke unenthusiastically. "A man can dream though. Hey, I wouldn't cancel the date yet, the competition's pretty rough this year." Nico commented. "That's bad energy, hoping your team will lose," Karasu said with a smile in his voice. "I'm not hoping, just accepting of that potential outcome. Denial isn't good energy either." Karasu chortled before he changed the subject. "How has the weather been?" He stretched a little as he spoke. "I've been inside all day and it's making me crazy. After my shift I'm planning to go to the onsen. Working the Chunin exam really cracks down on my free time and I need every moment to unwind." "What free time?" Nico asked wryly. "Exactly," Kusasu echoed. "Well, it was pretty windy when I was last out and the leaves were falling again." Kakashi sighed. "Maybe I should cross my fingers that my genin pass, if only to avoid the D-rank yard work." Karasu groaned at the words. "Think there'll be a storm?" "Prayed so. I guess your onsen plan will have to wait until you get another break. So maybe next week then," Nico said with an impish tone. "More likely next month." Kakashi smiled. The woes of being the ninja elite. The female medic nin came over suddenly, halting the conversation. "Is there something you need?" she asked the gray-haired Jonin, a suspicious look on her face. Part of her duty was to ensure the infirmary station was clear of any unnecessary ninja from any village. She'd assume he was discussing business with the Anbu, but she heard a tale of their conversation and rolled her eyes. They were tremendously unprofessional, but it wasn't her place to say. "You know, I completely forgot why I came down the stairs in the first place," Kakashi said with a sheepish expression. She rolled her eyes, but moved on. Kakashi retrieved his orange book and walked back out the medical area with his nose buried deep in Icha paradise. When arrived back at the observation deck, the round was already over and some of the supplementary proctors were repairing the floor that had been destroyed. "Hey, Kakashi-sensei." Naruto greeted excitedly as he walked towards his team. "Hello, what did I miss?" he asked mildly. "The Suna shinobi totally won." Sakura informed him with an eager smile. "You missed it. It was so awesome. The Sunanin had a puppet, but it turned out that the puppet was the Sunanin the whole time, and the Sunanin was the puppet, and then wham!" Naruto exclaimed, "He just got him." "Thank you for the recap, Naruto." Kakashi sighed inwardly at his student's hyper behavior. At least now he knew why Sakura was so effusive. A quick look to the side informed Kakashi that Sasuke had his lips firmly closed, clearly deciding just not to say anything at all. Kakashi was mildly disappointed. He had rather hoped to see the Uchiha heir in a bubbly mood, though he figured it would only be a matter of time. The fourth match will soon begin. Gekko coughed loudly as the large screen shuffled names before the pairing was decided. Her oil blue eyes widened in delight. "Yes." Naruto whooped, drawing a fair amount of attention to him. "I am so ready for this." "Naruto," Sakura said exasperatedly, though smiling. Naruto's excitement was contagious. The fourth match will be between Uzumaki Naruto of Konoha and Okado Yoroi, also of Konoha. The tall, fairly burly man stepped forward. His dark glasses hid his eyes from view and the rest of his face was covered by a bandana. "Don't lose, dope," Sasuke said nonchalantly. The wide grin spread over Naruto's face and his confidence swept through Sakura and Sasuke too. "Are you kidding me, lose when I'm this close to becoming a Chunin? No way. DCH, we'll see about that." Sasuke smirked. "Whatever team, I'll be back up after I win." Naruto jumped off the balcony and onto the fighting arena. "Now that both participants are here, the fourth match may commence," Gekko said, coughing as he walked away. Naruto assumed his brawler position in anticipation of an attack. The other ninja stared down at his opponent, his entire posture screamed arrogance. "You won't come at me? Fine, I'll come to you." Naruto shouted before he made 10 clones and went charging in. On the rafters, his fellow team members were shaking their heads at his rash declaration. Blue chakra coated the other ninja's hand, and before Naruto could react, his opponent was charging through the ranks of shadow clones. Pops rang out in quick succession as Yoroi jabbed the clones that were in his way, quickly dispersing them. In a flash, he stood before the original and grabbed the younger nin by his neck. The blue chakra surrounding his hands pulsed and Naruto gasped. "Naruto!" Sakura shouted, feeling his panic. Suddenly a smug sense of satisfaction began to settle in Sakura and she had no clue where it was coming from. She turned toward Sasuke, but his brow was slightly furrowed, showing that he was also confused. Then there was a popping sound followed by an explosion, and the burly man with the glasses was sent flying to the other side of the room. The audience was stunned as Naruto stood defiantly with his arms folded in the clearing cloud of smoke with barely a scratch on him. "What just happened?" Ino asked blankly. "I think Naruto just won," Shikamaru said with disbelief. "Naruto, you clever dog." Kakashi thought to himself with a smile. "This match isn't over yet." Yoroi shouted as he picked himself up from the rubble. His clothes and hair were a little scorched, but there didn't appear to be any vital damage. "Not yet, but soon." Naruto grinned. "I figured out you were doing more than just popping my clones after the first handful you destroyed, so I decided to allow myself to get captured. Then I used a Kawamiri jutsu to substitute myself with one of my clones." Which hit an exploding tag. "I hope you liked that last touch," Naruto said with a foxy grin. Inside he was intensely relieved he had been able to pull the Kawamiri, a jutsu that had long escaped his grasp. That probably had to do with his constantly shifting chakra levels more than anything else, but still, he couldn't help but feel proud, especially about his new intelligence gathering skills. "Naruto, you're too much," Kakashi said with a sigh. "Why did he just explain everything? That means he won't be able to use that trick in the future." Sakura groaned. "Still, that was pretty impressive," Ino said, "for Naruto, that is. I now know the secret of your blue hand jutsu Thinji," the blonde declared. The upper balcony sweat dropped. "Oh really?" Yoroi chuckled lightly. "And what exactly is the secret?" "You're trying to steal my chakra," Naruto said with an accusatory tone that was borderline childish. "Are there really jutsu like that, sensei?" Sakura asked curiously. She'd never heard of such a dangerous jutsu at the academy. "Yes," he replied, "though they are usually too high level for genin to use. The chakra control necessary can only be accessed by jonin or strong chunin most of the time." Kakashi wasn't terribly concerned though. If the other nin had gotten anyone but Naruto, he probably would have stood a fair chance. As it was, Naruto's reserves were far too large for any one human to drain completely. He was interested to see what his excitable student would do next. Sakura on the other hand, was unable to completely hide the worry that settled over her features after hearing her sensei's words. What a dangerous jutsu, the Kunoichi thought to herself. Just because you figured out my jutsu doesn't mean you'll be able to stop me from draining you dry. With that, Yoroi began running straight for Naruto. The orange-clad ninja sent a flurry of kunai towards his attacker, all of which were dodged or batted away. Twisting his lips into a frown, Naruto peppered his opponent with kunai that had explosive tags tied to them. The cloud of smoke and dust grew in the central area of the room, engulfing Naruto and Yoroi. The Jinchuriki made another handful of clones to explore the fog as the original squinted and tried to see through the haze. There was a popping sound and Naruto's eyes darted towards the right. But then he received a flash of memories from a clone on the left. His eyes darted every which way, trying to figure out what was going on. It was no use, the dust and smoke was still too thick. Naruto leapt backwards and out of the cloud. Before he even landed, a hand darted forth from the haze and grabbed Naruto by the throat. His neck creaked painfully as his breathing strained. He automatically raised his hands in the familiar cross-shaped hand sign when another pair of hands grabbed his and pulled them awkwardly behind his back. He glanced backwards to find another Yoroi behind him holding his hands apart from each other. You're stupid if you think you're the only one who can make solid clones, Yoroi's deep voice said menacingly. I'm going to enjoy choking you, but I won't put you out of your misery until you pay me back for all those cuts and scratches you gave me. Blue chakra enveloped his hands, and Naruto's mouth opened in a silent scream as he felt his life force being drained from his body. Naruto! Sakura cried. Naruto-kun. Hinata echoed, fear building in her eyes. Hey, Naruto, don't give up. Shikamaru urged. Do you think he's going to substitute again? Hey, maybe this is just a part of his plan. Ino said, distressed by her friend's reactions. Not this time, Sakura said, shaking her head. He's really scared this time, I can feel it. Ino gave her an odd look, but the pink-haired Kunoichi ignored it. Her mind was focused on the terrible feeling of desperation and pain, slowly engulfing her teammate. She hated the connection now more than ever. The desperation and panic made her knees tremble, and she wondered if this is what dying felt like. She turned toward Sasuke desperately and found her crush gritting his teeth fiercely against the onslaught of emotions. That idiot. Sasuke ground out. Sakura started crying for real now. She didn't think she could bear being emotionally tied to Naruto and have to feel him die. She couldn't do it. Suddenly, a cry of pain lit up the air and it didn't come from Naruto. Yoroi let go of Naruto with a scream before holding his hands up to his face. A faint outline of red energy surrounded their teammate. Oh my god, Sakura felt nauseous as she saw the spirals of smoke rising from the opponent's burning palms. What did you? Yoroi turned to Naruto to demand but was met by the blonde's fist. With a strong series of punches, the burly leaf nin was out for the count. His earth clone quickly crumbled, leaving Naruto standing and gasping. That's what you get for trying to steal my chakra, he said in a raspy voice, breathing heavily. His eyes were dark and he fought to bury the red chakra. The desperation was still strong though, he remembered reaching out for anything to stop the enemy shinobi from stealing his life force. One moment his body was running dry and the next his system was flush with crimson energy. The fluxes, he decided, weren't that great after all. Especially since he couldn't lock it down. It was still leaking from his body. Inhale and exhale, he thought to himself. Slowly, he managed to bring down his pulse and calm the sudden surge of energy. So engaged was Naruto with his thoughts that when a voice finally called out into the silent arena, the blonde shinobi actually jumped. The winner of round 4 is Uzumaki Naruto of Konoha. Gekko called. I can't believe it, Ino uttered, stupefied. Naruto actually won. What just happened? Shikamaru asked, voicing just about everyone's thoughts. The group of Jonin observing had eventually arrived to a conclusion involving the poisonous fox chakra. They exchanged furtive glances, some more uneasy than others, but all of them hid their reactions. Kakashi in particular was perturbed by seeing a flash of the red chakra manifest. Though he realized that the latest addition to the seal on Naruto's stomach could well be influencing his affiliation with the fox's chakra. He'd have to keep a closer eye on his blonde genin. If the Kyuubi's chakra was leaking out faster than Naruto's body could assimilate it, then they needed to start working on a solution immediately. Hopefully though, when the Sandaime removed Orochimaru's seal, Naruto's system would return to normal. Yoroi was a perfect example of how toxic the Kyuubi's chakra really was to humans. The upper balcony watched a quick conversation take place between Naruto and the attending medic, in which Naruto repeatedly shook his head. Eventually, a frustrated-looking medic nin walked away and Naruto began heading back up to rejoin his team. Naruto? What are you doing? You need to get your neck looked at. Sakura yelled at him. The blonde ninja waved her words away. It'll heal on its own, Naruto said hoarsely. Her eyes narrowed, but Ino interrupted before she could reply. What was that all about though? How'd you burn that guy's palms off? Ino asked bluntly. Naruto's head tilted downward and Sakura and Sasuke felt a small blanket of fear settle around their teammate. The two exchanged glances. I didn't mean to, really, Naruto mumbled. I was just trying to overload him. It was an accident. The amount of chakra needed for something like that. Shikamaru shook his head. I knew Naruto had a lot of chakra, but that's just ridiculous. Gee. Sasuke scoffed from the side. I don't know what you're so afraid about. You shouldn't be so scared just because someone tried to steal your chakra. If you really become an actual ninja, you'll be going against much scarier stuff. He wouldn't acknowledge that he had nearly choked when he felt Naruto dying through the bond. This was the ninja world, he reminded himself resolutely. If it was frightening to Naruto, the blonde needed to leave before his weakness affected Sasuke's growth. Sasuke-kun, Sakura said softly. It isn't that. Naruto shook his head fervently, anger settling in the air. I know that I've faced much scarier stuff. The blonde said, recalling his fight with Haku, Zabuza, and Gato's henchmen. It's not that I'm afraid of that guy. What then? Sasuke asked. It's that he was afraid the Kyuubi's chakra would manifest. He was afraid everyone, his teammates especially, would see it. He was afraid of losing control and hurting people. Those were his fears. After what happened with Haku, he couldn't help but be worried. The rage and the memories still felt so close to the surface. He shied away from the intensity. "Cool it, you two," Kakashi said, placing a palm on each boy's shoulder. "Let's save this discussion for another time." "Whatever," Sasuke muttered, walking back to the banister. Naruto took a few breaths trying to clamp down on his fear and irritation. "Whatever the case is, you won, Naruto. Congratulations. You're going on to the next round," Sakura declared, trying to disperse the tenseness in the bond. Naruto's eyes widened with gratitude. He allowed his female teammates' feelings to seep into him and tried to drown out his worries. When Sakura was nice, it felt really good. "Not bad, Naruto, not bad," Shikamaru said with a lax smile. Naruto chuckled and scratched the back of his head, beginning to feel proud. "I guess I did do it, huh?" Naruto thought to himself, feeling better even if the fox played a part in it. Hinata carefully came next to the orange ninja and played with the tips of her fingers and Naruto, "Congra, the next round's coming up." Kiba whooped. "Alright." Naruto croaked with his scratchy voice. He immediately regretted the action as sharp pain shot up his throat. "Why are you yelling, Naruto?" Sakura demanded before slapping him over the head. "You're going to lose your voice, idiot." "Ow." Naruto exclaimed. "That hurt, Sakura-chan." He sullenly rubbed his head. When she was mean, it didn't feel very good at all. The fifth match will be between Uchiha Sasuke and Tenten, both competitors are from Konohagakure. Finally, Sasuke said with a confident smirk. Without a word to either of his teammates, he walked to the stairs and entered the fighting arena. A little further down, a kunoichi wearing a pink shirt with her hair in two buns was fending off Guy-sensei's exclamations of youth. "So that's Tenten, I guess," Naruto mused aloud as he watched. "I hardly know who any of these competitors from Konoha are. The couple groups are repeats who have tried several times over the years to pass, and a few have just waited to take the exam." Guy's team and an example, Asuma said, overhearing Naruto's question. "Tenten, Lee and their other teammate Neji are from the year ahead of you all. They learn under Mito Guy, whom I'm sure you've already noticed." Hard to miss, Sakura trailed off quietly. "They're a heavy-hitting team," Asuma continued, "seeing as Guy's their instructor, it's no wonder that all of them are Taijutsu specialists." Guy perked up at the mention of his name. "Not just specialists," Guy interrupted. A quiet laugh quirked his lips before quickly growing loud. "They are Taijutsu geniuses. All of them," he exclaimed. "Ai-sensei." Lee's eyes were watering and Neji, who was beside him, just sighed irritably. "So Kakashi, are you worried?" Guy asked with a cocksure smile. "Tenten is a real firecracker. I think you'll find she's more than a match for your student." What are you asking?" Kakashi asked, not bothering to look up from his book. "Just what I expect from you, Kakashi," Guy said, staying cool in the face of the struggle. Kakashi sighed inwardly. "If everyone's ready, we are going to start the next round," Gekko coughed. Glancing between Tenten and Sasuke before slicing his hand down decisively. "Hajime." The minute the word left the instructor's lips, Sasuke had begun forming hand signs. "Hain. Nkakik no jutsu." With a quick show of gymnastics, the kunoichi maneuvered herself away from the fiery blast. Tenten then retaliated by unleashing a barrage of weapons toward the Uchiha. Sasuke jumped away, but when he landed there was another set of kunai and shuriken coming at him. He grit his teeth and pulled out a kunai of his own and began slicing them out of the air as they came at him. A few made it past his guard, nicking his calves. "Sasuke-kun." Anger built at Sakura's cry and anxiety, and he forced the emotion over hers. Tenten smirked, clearly thinking she had the advantage in their fight. A smile slowly spread over Sasuke's face as he activated the Sharingan. He watched her guard tighten further, waiting for his next move, but instead Sasuke stood still, waiting for her. She didn't disappoint, quickly attacking him with a spray of kunai covered in explosive tags. Sasuke's eyes watched them move through the air, catching their every motion. He stopped trying to anticipate her moves and instead let his sight guide him out of the way. "Oh, Sasuke-kun." Sakura and Ino echoed from the stands, but his focus didn't waver from the weapons mistress, who was looking more irritated by the second. "Stay still." She grit out. Sasuke smirked at her lost concentration as he dodged another handful of weapons and then another. Inwardly, he worked on a retaliation plan. Though he could probably wait for her to run out of weapons, it would probably waste too much unnecessary chakra. With that in mind, he waited for her to throw more weapons before moving out of the way and towards her. Using the Sharingan, he dodged every weapon and moved closer and closer to his quarry. She panicked and threw more and more, but it was too late, he knew her pattern. Using his kunai to block her close-quarter attacks, he pivoted behind her and delivered a swift chop to the back of her neck, sufficiently knocking her out. He stood above her unconscious form, smirk firmly in place as Gekko announced the winner. Sasuke watched as the medic nin collected Tenten's unconscious body. He declined their offer to patch him up, not wanting to miss out on the next match because of a few scratches. He had outsmarted her at her own game, and that was a satisfying feeling. In addition, he didn't doubt that the weapon techniques he picked up from her would serve him well in the future. As he approached the stands, he belatedly noticed a sense of pride, glee and jealousy. The glee was a little overzealous, but Sasuke especially enjoyed the jealousy. "Well done Sasuke," Kakashi complimented with a smile. "Yeah, that was amazing Sasuke-kun." Sakura bubbled. "HNN," he replied uninterestedly. His attentions were focused on the remaining genin, specifically to the ones across the balcony. The red-haired Sunanin had yet to go, but from what Sasuke saw from his puppet-wielding teammate, they were a force to be reckoned with. His eyes cut sideways to where the male Hyuga resided. Those expressionless pale eyes were strong. He couldn't wait to see what the Hyuga could do. "I expected a good opponent from your students Kakashi," Guy said with a serious hand on his chin. "I'm glad to see you didn't disappoint. Her youth lane will only grow after this battle." Right, Kakashi returned to his book. The ground remained intact, and there were only a few small blood stains and melted floor tiles to clean up before the next round, so it wasn't too long before Gekko was clearing his throat. "The sixth match will begin now." As he spoke, the screen activated, randomizing the pairings. "The seventh match will begin now." As he spoke, the screen activated, randomizing the pairings. "The next match will be between Aburame Shino of Konoha and Yamanaka Ino also of Konoha." Ino exhaled in relief. "Thank goodness. I thought I was going to get one of the monsters." She vaguely gestured to the Sand Trio and Niji. Despite being in earshot, the Hyuga male showed no outward reaction. Which Asuma was grateful about. Ino's loose lips could sink ships that would be very important later on when the group of them began working together on a higher level. "Ino, the Aburames are a well-known and respected clan of the village. Do you remember what your father taught you about them?" Asuma asked. She paused before flushing as she failed to recall what exactly the Aburames were known for. All she remembered was that it was something gross. Asuma just shook his head before smiling. "You can do it Ino," he urged. "Yeah." Choji put forth in between eating his potato chips. "Aburames are so troublesome," Shikamaru said. "Thanks for the support Shikamaru." She said sarcastically, "I mean honestly, how hard is it to get a little team spirit from you, huh?" Shikamaru sighed. "Whatever, I am so ready for this. Just watch me Sasuke-kun," she said with a flirty smile. Gekko cleared his throat as he watched the medical nin pick a dazed Ino off of the ground. She was muttering bugs over and over to herself, making the rest of the rookie nine avert their eyes awkwardly. The winner of round 6 is Aburame Shino of Konoha. The next round will begin immediately. There were no stains after that short and eventless fight, so the screen promptly began flipping through names. "Horino," Sakura said a little softly. Disgust was still swirling under her skin. She could hardly imagine what would have happened to her if she had gone against a bug nin. Looking around at the remaining competitors, Sakura had to take a deep breath. None of them looked like they were going to be pushovers. She sighed. Then again, no one who had already gone had exactly been weak. Still, she could hope that maybe she could get Kiba. He was still a rookie just like she was, so at least her chances would be better. Sakura-chan." Naruto tugged one of her new elbow sleeves to get her attention. She was going to whip around and maybe hit him for interrupting her train of thought, but realized that her name was on the board. All thoughts fled her mind. It was go time, and her opponent. The seventh match will be between Akimichi Choji from Konoha and Haruno Sakura, also from Konoha. Complete and total relief swept through her body. Thank God. She had forgotten about Ino's other teammate. But sharpened her mind anyways. Looks could be deceiving as Shino just demonstrated. Especially considering that her opponent came from a clan. From what she remembered at the academy, the Akimichi had some sort of expansion jutsu, but she couldn't remember what exactly that meant. She'd never seen it because they trained that jutsu exclusively in their clans for the most part. "Good luck," Shikamaru said mildly to his teammate. The other boy gave him a thumbs up as he dropped the empty bag of potato chips in his hands. He looked fairly confident in his abilities, which made Sakura feel both anger and insecurity. He seemed to think he had it made, getting Sakura as a competitor. She would show him. Her inner persona was getting prodded. "Hey, Asuma-sensei, will you take me to Barbec if I win?" The jonin in question scratched his cheek. I guess so. Alright. I lucked out, Shikamaru," Choji said, clearly unaware that Sakura was listening. "Free Barbec, here I come." He exclaimed with fervor as he went down the stairs. "We'll show him." Her inner voice raged. Next to her, Sasuke and Naruto started in surprise. The emotions coming from their teammate were very different than usual. This was especially startling considering that on the outside she didn't look different. "Let's do this," she exclaimed confidently before jumping off the balcony. "Oh Sakura-chan." Naruto cheered, catching on to her competitive energy. She honed her determination, ready to show Sasuke-kun what she was made of. Gekko coughed, "Let the seventh match begin." She jumped away, landing in a perfect defensive position to respond to any kind of attack. Joji smirked before he pulled his hands together in a strange hand sign. Expansion jutsu. His body ballooned right before her eyes, turning into a gigantic ball. The floor below it caved under his weight, leaving depressions in the stone. His head and arms disappeared from sight, and the next thing she knew, the ball was heading towards her with dangerous speed. She hadn't been expecting this. With a small cry she jumped out of the way. He turned around in a big U-shape before coming at her again. She couldn't help but scream as he plowed towards her. He was much harder than she had thought. Sakura dodged out of Joji's destructive path once more, mind spinning frantically to figure out a strategy. I can't keep dodging like this, she thought frustrated to herself. There has to be something else that I can do. There were no weapons she could use in her academy-style weapons pouch, but besides that, his body was too large for her to hit with anything. The jutsu in her collection were miserably few and all but useless. Dread began to fill her as she realized that there was nothing she could do. Sakura-chan. Don't give up. Her head twitched to the side, catching the image of her annoying blonde teammate. Beside him though, watching the round, was her crush. She couldn't give up, not now. Naruto was oozing encouragement and confidence, and Sakura let it fill her and give her new strength. She could do this. Her mind flipped to the past round she had seen, looking for an idea. A smile spread over her face. Yeah, that could work. This time when Choji changed directions and began plowing towards her, she held her ground, waiting for him to get close to her. Sakura-chan. Naruto shouted from the balcony. She didn't hear him, her mind was focused on the timing of when to make her move. He's gonna hit her. Not close enough yet. Sakura-chan. Move. Her gaze sharpened. When he was a few meters from her, she started doing a string of back handsprings. Her body began gaining momentum as she continued flipping away from Choji. She clenched her teeth, trying to stop the nausea from building up. She couldn't lose focus now. With careful timing, she was able to reach into her pack and grab what she needed while doing one-handed back handsprings. Sakura. The wall. Naruto exclaimed. From her upside-down and constantly moving perspective, she could barely make out how close the gray wall was to her position. She grit her teeth. It was now or never. With as much precision as she could manage, she set down what she wanted before nearing the wall with frightening speed. She's going to hit it. Sakura wondered who that was. She could barely make out any of the other voices as her mind focused so heavily on the task at hand. At the last moment, she sprung herself forward, landing about halfway up the wall. She rested there on the side of the wall using her chakra to hold her in place, panting from the exertion. Her muscles screamed at her after the long trail of gymnastics. Her mind stayed focused though as she examined her oncoming opponent, waiting to see if her plan would work. "Choji, stop!" Shikamaru shouted. The Akimichi attempted to slow and stop, but it was too late because at that very moment, an explosion resounded off the walls, filling the air with smoke. Another explosion followed after and yet another, until the dazed boy slammed straight into the wall. For a few moments the arena was filled with smoke. Naruto leaned over the rail wrapped with attention, while Shikamaru ran his hand through his hair tiredly. The smoke soon cleared, revealing an unconscious Akimichi. Sakura was crouched several yards above him, still using chakra to glue herself to the wall. The Kunoichi exhaled in relief. She had done it. Her plan had worked. After realizing there wasn't a weapon in her pouch, she recalled seeing what Shikamaru had done by using the arena as a tool. Sakura realized she did in fact a weapon that was even larger than Choji. Still, she could barely believe it worked. She allowed herself to drop to the floor and took a moment to regain her balance. Meanwhile, the proctor walked closer to examine the exact state of the Akimichi. With a short nod to the medic Nin, he turned to the audience. The winner of round 7 is Sakura Haruno of Konoha. A handful of ninja immediately poured into the room to repair the extensive damage and Choji was carted out of the room. "Way to go Sakura-chan." Naruto shouted from the balcony. She smiled and headed up the stairs to rejoin her team. Her feelings of excitement were brimming. In actuality, she hadn't really thought she stood a chance of moving on to the third round with a collection of opponents that were this strong, but she had done it. She was going to the third round of the Chunin exam. She couldn't wait to see Ino's face. "Congratulations Sakura. You did it." She tried to peek at Sasuke from the corner of her eyes to see his reaction, but he was resolutely turned away. He was probably too overwhelmed to say anything. She definitely felt a lot of excitement from someone in the emotional connection. "Very well done Sakura," Kakashi complimented, "you took a page from Shikamaru's book." "Wait, what happened?" Naruto asked. He hadn't actually seen everything that happened, it had been too fast for him to follow. She led Choji on a charge and then set up a string of explosive tags. Her opponent was too dazed to stop his path towards the wall. "A good plan, though Sakura, next time, I would advise you to follow through on your attack," Kakashi warned. Even if Choji hit the wall, it wasn't guaranteed that he was knocked unconscious. It would have been better to prepare for a secondary attack. She nodded, though his words didn't pierce her haze of happiness. Sakura smiled and blushed. she did it. She was in the final with Sasuke-kun. This set off a small chorus of groans from her teammates. She was too happy to stop though. Sakura wasn't going to be left behind. All three of you did admirably today, Kakashi said. He honestly hadn't believed that all three of them would be participating in the third round. Perhaps I've underestimated them, Kakashi thought to himself. The 8th round will commence soon, Gekko said, watching as the assistant shinobi fixed the last big hole in the wall. There were a few moments of obligatory hackings before Gekko announced the next pairing. The next round will be Inyazuka Kiba vs Hyuga Neji, both from Konohagakure. Sakura sat down heavily on the floor against the wall, finally feeling comfortable enough to relax for the first time since the exam started. Both of her other teammates already passed and now all three of them would be progressing. Whatever happened next wouldn't change that. She could still see most of the match from here, so she figured it was okay to unwind and relax. Unlike her, Naruto was still heavily invested in seeing the rest of the competition and he jumped up and down impatiently as the two boys went down to the floor. Sasuke also kept watching, leaning next to the railing as he gathered more information. Kiba grinned cockily at Neji and the Hyuga gave him a condescending look. Naruto was psyched to see what would happen. He knew that Kiba fought with Akamaru, but he had no idea what the other guy did. He frowned as he remembered the cocky attitude. Why were there so many Sasukes in the world, he wondered. He never smiled and his attitude was completely dumb. It was really suckish. If the world had more Narutos instead of Sasukes, he'd bet it'd be a better place. The moment Gekko announced the beginning of the match, Kiba charged at Neji. The Hyuga grabbed onto Kiba's arm, redirecting the energy towards the wall. Kiba barely managed to skid to a stop. He whipped and glared before activating his dog jutsu. Both opponents focus on Taijutsu-style attacks, this should be interesting, Kurenai commented offhandedly. Both opponents focus on Taijutsu-style attacks, this should be interesting, Kurenai commented offhanded. Interested to see how Kiba stacks up? Guy asked competitively. No, just curious to see how he handles a fighter like Neji. Our team focuses mainly on reconnaissance, so he rarely comes across enemies like this. What about you? How do you think Neji will handle both Kiba and Akamaru? Though the Hyuga's specialty is single-person combat, that doesn't mean they can't handle more opponents, Guy replied, a confident smile spreading over his face. With those eyes he sees everything. Eyes? Naruto asked with blatant confusion. Don't you know anything about the history of our village? Sakura asked irritably. Naruto ducked the feeling before shrugging a little sullenly. The Hyugas have a bloodline, and it's a Taijutsu, just like Sasuke-kun's, Sakura explained knowledgeably. Hyugas? Naruto's brow furrowed. Wait. Hinata, you're a Hyuga, aren't you? He asked, turning his full attention to the timid girl who stood a bit down the railing. He remembered me. She thought to herself, all while flushing furiously under his gaze. Why yes, she answered eventually. Good. Then you can explain this whole eye thing, right? Naruto asked, coming over to stand next to her. Their shoulders were nearly touching. Impossibly, her face reddened further. I'll do my best. She promised before taking a deep breath. The Byakugan is a bloodline that the Hyugas have. It allows the user to see the chakra points. Hinata explained. She tried to focus on what she was saying to distract herself from his piercing blue eyes. Why's that good? Naruto scratched his head. Naruto baka. It gives them a huge advantage. Sakura scolded. Why? Naruto asked, still misunderstanding. Why does it matter that they can see the chakra and stuff? Because then they can attack the chakra points, dope, Sasuke scoffed, dripping with condescension, which Sakura gladly echoed through the bond. Shut up team. Naruto growled. The chakra points are important to the body, and the Byakugan allows the user to close them, Hinata stuttered. Oh. That's way cool. Naruto effused. Naruto, you don't even know what that means, Sakura said, a tad condescending. I know it's awesome, he retorted lamely. Traditionally, it's used to stop an opponent from accessing their chakra. Hinata toyed with her fingers, studiously avoiding Naruto's eyes. Naruto's face lit up with amazement as the full implication of the power sunk in. Oh wow. Exactly, Sakura replied. Is that why his eyes are all weird and veiny looking? He asked tactlessly. It's a sign that the Taijutsu is activated, Hinata said, awkwardly looking down at the floor. And you do that too? Naruto asked, staring intently at her. Why yeah, I can, she said, squirming under his gaze as she examined the concrete floor. That's so cool. Her eyes shot up, catching his brimming smile. Thank you Naruto, Hinata stuttered, her face flushing badly. Sure. Are you okay Hinata, your face looks sorta red, Naruto asked, brow furrowing. Odd, so hopeless. Sakura muttered to herself. Naruto caught her emotions and sent her a curious glance. What is it? Naruto inquired. Nothing, don't even ask, she said shortly. But Sakura-chan. Pay attention to the match Naruto, Sakura, you might learn something. Kakashi suggested. Now that his students were going on to the final round, they needed as much information they could get. One of these genin could be your opponent in the final round. Sakura and Naruto exchanged serious looks. The pink-haired Kunoichi carefully picked herself off the ground to get a better view despite her aching muscles. Naruto and Sakura turned back to the battle, watching with blatant amazement as Neji gradually pounded away at Kiba and Akamaru with what seemed like small strikes, but built up to fully cover Kiba's chakra points to the point he could no longer stand. Akamaru, who was still standing despite his weakened state, barked pitifully at Kiba. The Inyazuka glared weakly at Neji, still conscious and very displeased with the battle. That was awesome. Naruto exhaled. The winner of match 8 is Hyuga Neji. That's right, Neji. Guy said with his good guy pose. The Hyuga was silent as he rejoined the group, arms folded and eyes expressionless. The coolness of his actions sort of irritated Naruto, but at the same time, the blonde boy couldn't help but find the techniques he used to be particularly neat. Though it's pretty dangerous, Naruto thought as he watched the supplementary examiners clean the blood off the floor with various jutsu. The fact that such a gentle girl like Hinata could use the same jutsu struck him with amazement. Kurenai went down the floor and talked to Kiba before picking him up and bringing him up to the walkway. She tried to lean her student carefully against the wall, but every movement made him wince in pain. Why, you should be resting, Kiba-kun. Hinata said, worry in her voice. And miss your match? No way. He asserted wearily. The smile on his face was genuine, making Hinata smile in response. The 9th match will begin after the pairings have been chosen, Gekko said after everything was repaired. The roulette went again. The remaining genin held their collective breaths. Then the names on the screen stopped, along with Hinata's heart. The 9th match will be Hyuga Hinata of Konoha against Subaku no Gaara of Suna. Memories of the brutal killing her and her team had witnessed filtered in front of her mind, and her breath caught in fear. Oh god, she uttered. What is it, Hinata? Naruto asked. I don't think I can. Weak. Naruto whipped his head around to find the person who said that single word. The other Hyuga met his eyes challengingly. What did you say? He asked angrily. I said, weak. Neji repeated with a challenging expression. Do you not even have you the pride to face him like a shinobi? His lips curled. Naruto-kun, it's nothing. Neji-san is right, I should face him like a shinobi. I can do this. The waver in her voice belied her words. Hinata, the voice was soft. She turned to see Kiba with a desperate look in his eyes. Don't do this, he urged. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. Her confliction was palpable. Of course you can. Naruto exclaimed eagerly. You can do all that awesome chakra stuff your cousin did, huh, Hinata? Naruto asked, admiration and excitement visible. Hinata blushed. Well, Neji-san is very talented foe. Don't put yourself down like that. I bet you're just as amazing. Naruto crowed, you were always super smart in the academy, and I'm sure you've just gotten smarter and more powerful. Her face reddened even further at his praise. And then Naruto-kun, you can do it. He said with a brimming smile and a thumbs up. Right. She took a deep breath and went down the stairs. DSK. As if a few words can change a person's fate. The disapproving sound came from behind him and Naruto whipped around once more. You know, you're really beginning to piss me off. Naruto said as he glared at Neji, who decided to pointedly ignore him. Are you okay, Kiba? Kurenai asked, noting his strange silence. Oh shit, Kiba said distantly, his face pale. What's wrong? Sakura asked. That guy, Kiba swallowed as the red-haired ninja in question appeared on the ground level with a flash of sand. That guy ain't normal.